Elon Musk had never been one for idle moments. The world was always moving at a frantic pace around him, and he kept up with it, always a few steps ahead, never allowing himself to linger. From the early days of founding Zip2 to launching rockets into space, every minute had been accounted for with little room for anything else. But on this particular day, as he walked across the tarmac at a private airstrip in Northern California, something was different. It wasn't the sharp, crisp air or the familiar hum of his team's vehicles bustling around, preparing for the next flight. No, this felt odd. Almost like an unseen pull in the atmosphere, as if the universe had slowed just enough to make him feel aware of the smallest details. As he passed his private jet, preparing for another flight to oversee a Tesla manufacturing facility, he felt something, or rather, someone, staring at him. A small, tawny figure emerged from the brush along the edge of the runway. At first, he thought it was a stray cat, perhaps an abandoned pet, wandering aimlessly. But as the figure grew closer, he realized that this was no house cat. This was a bobcat, its sleek, spotted fur blending almost perfectly with the golden grasses and dirt of the area. Its piercing eyes locked onto Elon's, unwavering. Elon paused in his tracks. He had seen wild animals before, deer, coyotes, even the occasional mountain lion, but a bobcat? It wasn't common for such a creature to be this close to human activity. They preferred the shadows, the wilderness far from prying eyes. Yet here this one was, sitting just a few feet away, staring up at him. "Hey there, little one," Elon murmured, not expecting a response. He instinctively took a step back, watching the bobcat's every movement. The animal didn't flinch, didn't shy away. It simply watched him, eyes wide and intent, as if it was waiting for something, waiting for him. Curiosity piqued, Elon took a cautious step toward the animal. It tilted its head slightly, its golden fur ruffling ever so slightly in the breeze. There was something about its posture, calm yet deliberate, that struck Elon as unusual. It wasn't aggressive, nor did it seem frightened. It was as if the bobcat had a mission, and Elon was a part of it. "All right, what do you want?" Elon muttered under his breath. He felt ridiculous, talking to a wild animal, but something about this moment felt significant. As he watched the bobcat take a step closer, he was struck by a strange thought. Was it following him? The bobcat didn't break its gaze as it moved forward. It seemed to almost match Elon's pace as he continued walking. Slowly, with an intensity Elon could feel creeping up his spine, the animal followed. Elon stopped in his tracks again, blinking in disbelief. "Well, this is new," he said to himself, half exasperated, half amused. "What's your deal?" The bobcat didn't respond, obviously, but it didn't seem to need to. It just kept walking, staying right by Elon's side, as if it were somehow tethered to him, its presence unshakable. Elon began walking again, this time with a little more hesitation in his step. What did it mean? Why was it following him? Was this just some random event, or was it something more? As he approached the vehicle that would take him to the airport terminal, he noticed something strange. The bobcat didn't falter. It wasn't intimidated by the noise, the hustle, the human activity around them. It continued to follow him, unflinching, like a shadow. Elon reached for the door of his car, and for a split second, the bobcat paused, looking up at him one last time before following him into the vehicle. "No way," Elon muttered, half laughing to himself as he climbed into the back seat of the car. "This is the weirdest thing that's happened to me today, and I've had a pretty weird day." As the car started moving, the bobcat, surprisingly, didn't lose sight of him. It stood at the edge of the parking lot, watching as the vehicle sped away. Elon could see its silhouette in the rearview mirror, standing motionless, like a sentinel in the shadows. And despite the oddity of the situation, he felt a twinge of something he hadn't felt in a long time, curiosity. The car ride was short, and soon Elon was seated in a private meeting room at the airport, his mind drifting between business meetings, plans for new technologies, and thoughts of the strange encounter. The Bobcat had left his mind for a moment, lost to the noise of his responsibilities. Yet, as he began outlining the next steps for Tesla's global expansion, his thoughts drifted back to the wild animal. Why had it followed him? There had to be a reason. Animals didn't act on impulse the way humans did. There had to be something more. Could it have been attracted to something about him, something beyond just being a curious creature? Elon leaned back in his chair, rubbing his chin as he pondered. The Bobcat had made an impression on him, something about its eyes, something else, was lodged in his thoughts now. He knew his work in space exploration, his innovations with Tesla, his ventures with Neuralink, they were all changing the world. But what had this Bobcat come to teach him? Maybe I'm just overthinking this, Elon muttered to himself, pushing the thought aside. It's just a Bobcat. But was it? He couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this interaction than met the eye. As the meeting progressed, his mind remained distracted, constantly drifting back to the wild animal that had inexplicably entered his life. What if there was a reason the Bobcat had appeared when it did? What if this animal, this wild creature, so far removed from human life, was trying to tell him something? Maybe it was a sign. Maybe it was something he couldn't ignore. As he prepared to board his flight, a sense of unease lingered in the air. Elon walked toward the plane, glancing over his shoulder just once, half expecting to see the Bobcat there, waiting for him. But there was nothing, no small creature standing at the edge of the tarmac, no eyes watching him from afar. And yet, despite the lack of physical presence, Elon could not shake the feeling that something had changed. The encounter with the Bobcat, brief as it was, had stirred something inside of him, a curiosity, an unsettling feeling, and, for the first time in a long while, a sense that the world wasn't just about technology or business. There was something else. Something more. As the plane took off, Elon gazed out the window, watching the landscape shrink beneath him, lost in thought. He had a feeling that this was only the beginning of something bigger. Something he hadn't yet understood. "All right, little Bobcat," Elon muttered under his breath, "you've got my attention. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?" Elon Musk had always been an enigma to the world. To most people, he was simply a billionaire entrepreneur with a knack for taking on impossible challenges. From PayPal to Tesla, SpaceX to Neuralink, Elon's ventures had reshaped industries, from electric cars to space exploration. But the man behind these achievements was far more complex than his public persona. Born in Pretoria, South Africa, in 1971, Elon had always been an inquisitive child. Even as a young boy, he was known for his intense curiosity about how things worked. While other kids were playing outside, Elon could often be found disassembling gadgets or reading books on science and engineering. His mind was wired differently, constantly searching for answers to questions that most others didn't even think to ask. But for all of Elon's intellectual prowess, there was an emotional side of him that many didn't see. His childhood had been far from perfect. His parents, though supportive, were divorced when he was young, and Elon was often left to navigate the complexities of life on his own. His father, Elon Musk, was a successful engineer, but his relationship with Elon was distant and strained. Elon's mother, May, was a model and dietitian who supported him, but their family dynamic was far from typical. These early experiences would leave deep marks on Elon's emotional development. As a teenager, Elon faced bullying at school, his awkwardness amplified by his obsession with technology. But his intelligence had always been his shield, and by the time he was 17, he had moved to Canada to attend Queen's University, and later transferred to the University of Pennsylvania in the United States. It was here that Elon began his ascent, driven by a desire not just to make money, but to change the world. He believed that technology could solve the world's biggest problems: climate change, the energy crisis, and the need for space exploration. His journey had been nothing short of extraordinary. From founding Zip2, which he sold for nearly $300 million, to creating X.com, which later became PayPal. Elon's fortune grew rapidly. But it wasn't about the money for him, it was about the impact. His vision was always much larger than just creating successful companies. He wanted to leave a lasting legacy that would change humanity's trajectory. At Tesla, he had revolutionized the electric car industry, proving that sustainable energy could be both profitable and desirable. With SpaceX, he aimed to make space travel affordable and accessible, even dreaming of making humanity a multiplanetary species. Through Neuralink, he sought to bridge the gap between the human mind and machines, and with the Boring Company, he wanted to reimagine transportation. Yet despite all these groundbreaking achievements, Elon's life was far from perfect. Behind his public success, Elon had often been criticized for his uncompromising work ethic, his relentless pursuit of perfection, and his tendency to push his employees and himself beyond reasonable limits. He was seen by many as a visionary, but also as a man who could be distant, isolated, and, at times, emotionally distant. He had been married twice and divorced twice, and while he had children, the relationships were complex and strained. Elon's personal life was frequently overshadowed by his ambition and his single-minded drive to change the world. This drive, though admirable, had come at a cost. Over the years, Elon had become increasingly isolated. He spent long hours in his factories, his office, and on SpaceX launches, often sacrificing personal time and relationships. Despite being surrounded by millions of people who admired him and looked up to him, there were times when Elon felt utterly alone. The loneliness was a constant companion, though he rarely spoke about it. His focus on his work was often his escape from the inner turmoil he faced. On the surface, Elon Musk had everything: wealth, fame, a global following, and an empire built on his vision. But there was a deeper side to him that few people saw. Beneath the confident, often brash public persona was a man who longed for something more: connection, understanding, and love. Elon had a deep-rooted need to feel that he mattered, not just for the things he had created, but for who he was as a person. It was a need that he had pushed aside in favor of his ambitions, but it was there, lurking beneath the surface, waiting for a chance to be acknowledged. As Elon boarded his private jet, his mind once again drifted back to the strange encounter with the Bobcat. He had tried to dismiss it as just a random occurrence, a quirky moment that meant nothing. But there was a nagging feeling that he couldn't shake off. Why had the Bobcat followed him? Why had it appeared at that moment in time? Could it have been a sign of something deeper? The jet took off, and as the landscape of California stretched out beneath him, Elon leaned back in his seat, staring out the window. The bright city lights below slowly faded into the distance as he ascended into the clouds, his thoughts still with the Bobcat. He knew it was irrational to think that an animal could have a purpose, but there was something about the way the Bobcat had followed him, so determined, so unwavering, that made him wonder. It felt like more than just chance. It was as though the Bobcat was trying to tell him something, something he couldn't yet understand. Was it possible that the animal, in its own way, was seeking help? Or perhaps it was something more symbolic. Maybe the Bobcat, a creature known for its independence, saw something in Elon, a kindred spirit, lost in the vastness of the world, looking for meaning, for connection. Maybe it had come to remind him of the things he had been neglecting in his own life, things that couldn't be solved by rockets or electric cars. Elon let out a sigh, realizing he was overthinking it. There was no way an animal had come to deliver him a message, right? Yet, despite his logical mind telling him otherwise, something inside him wouldn't let it go. Maybe it was time for him to listen to that quiet voice inside, a voice that had long been drowned out by the noise of his relentless pursuit. Maybe the Bobcat wasn't just a creature following him for a reason he couldn't yet see. Maybe it was his cue to follow something greater, something that transcended the mission of his companies, the goals he had set for himself. Maybe it was time to reconnect with the world around him in a way he hadn't before. As the plane cruised above the clouds, Elon made a decision. He would look into this. Maybe there was something more to this Bobcat's appearance than mere coincidence. And maybe, just maybe, it would lead him to the answers he had been searching for all along. He glanced at his phone, scrolling through his messages, but for a brief moment, his mind was still with the Bobcat. And in that fleeting moment of reflection, Elon Musk, the driven, the visionary, the often unreachable figure, found himself asking the one question he had been avoiding for so long. What do I really need? He didn't have the answer yet, but he was starting to think that this strange encounter, this small Bobcat with its unshakable presence, might just help him find it. The following day was filled with the usual whirlwind of meetings, tech demos, and strategic planning for SpaceX's upcoming Mars mission. Elon Musk's calendar was always packed, a jigsaw puzzle of engagements that spanned from early morning to late at night. But despite the usual business, something about the Bobcat's visit the day before lingered in his mind, as if it had imprinted itself onto his subconscious. Elon sat in his private office at Tesla's headquarters in Palo Alto, his fingers poised over his laptop keyboard as he glanced at the new data coming in from one of the company's electric vehicle lines. Yet his mind was elsewhere. He found himself repeatedly looking out the window, distracted, wondering why the Bobcat had chosen him. There was something about the way the animal had followed him, so relentlessly, so purposefully, that he couldn't shake. It felt like a cosmic riddle, one that he had to solve, even if it didn't make any logical sense. Was it a coincidence? He ran his hand through his hair, exhaling in frustration. In all his years of studying space and the mysteries of the universe, he had never put much stock in signs or coincidences. Everything had a logical explanation, or at least, everything could be understood with enough data and analysis. Yet, this was different. The Bobcat had appeared out of nowhere, and for reasons he couldn't understand, had followed him like a shadow. And now, the thought of it kept nagging him. The rational side of him insisted that it was just a curious animal, but a more intuitive part, one that he had pushed aside for a long time, told him that there was something more to this encounter. He picked up his phone and called his assistant, Sarah, who was always ahead of him on scheduling and keeping his life in order. "Sarah, I need to find out more about Bobcats," he said without preamble. "Bobcats? Are we talking about the animal or is this some kind of metaphor, Elon?" she asked, her voice a mixture of amusement and confusion. "Just the animal. I want to know more about them, how they behave, where they live, why they might act in unusual ways." There was a pause on the other end of the line, and then Sarah's voice came through, more curious now. "Okay. I'll pull up some resources for you. Why the sudden interest?" "I don't know, just something about this one. It followed me yesterday," Elon said, his voice betraying a hint of uncertainty, something he rarely allowed others to hear. "It was like it was trying to tell me something. All right, I'll see what I can find. Should I expect a detailed report on Bobcats in an hour?" "Make it 20 minutes, Elon said, a half-smile playing on his lips. Sarah laughed. "Got it, boss." Elon hung up and turned his attention back to the window. He could see the sprawling Tesla factory in the distance, workers moving efficiently along assembly lines, cars being manufactured at a speed that was once unimaginable. It was an impressive sight, a tangible result of years of hard work, but today it seemed distant. The Bobcat was still in his thoughts, and he couldn't ignore the tugging sensation it had left inside him. What did it all mean? 20 minutes later, Sarah's email arrived, full of links, articles, and research papers about bobcats and their behaviors. Elon skimmed through the information quickly, but one thing stood out: bobcats, unlike other wild animals, were known for their territoriality and independence. They didn't follow humans unless they were either in distress or there was some kind of unusual attachment. It was rare, almost unheard of. He clicked on another article. Bobcats typically lived in forests and rural areas, away from human settlements. They hunted small mammals and birds, relying on stealth and patience to catch their prey. In rare cases, they were known to approach humans, particularly if they had been raised in captivity or had been exposed to humans at a young age. But even then, they didn't follow humans, they simply observed, keeping their distance. So, why had this bobcat followed him? Elon read on. The article mentioned that, occasionally, wild animals would follow people if they felt a deep connection to them, whether because of a shared energy or because they saw something in that person that resonated with them. It was a strange and somewhat mystical notion, one that Elon would have dismissed on any other day. But today, with the lingering thoughts of the bobcat in his mind, he couldn't shake the possibility that maybe, just maybe, there was something to it. As he finished reading, his phone buzzed. It was a message from Sarah. Elon, just heard back from some wildlife experts I know. They think this bobcat following you could be a rare occurrence, something very unusual for an animal of its kind. I'll keep digging and update you soon. Elon sighed and put the phone down, staring at the screen for a moment. He had never been one for superstition, never believed in fate or destiny. But today, with the encounter fresh in his mind, he wondered if there was more to the world than he had previously acknowledged. Later that afternoon, Elon found himself heading to one of Tesla's research facilities in the heart of Silicon Valley. It was an important visit, but as his car made its way through the streets of the tech hub, his thoughts continued to wander. He had always prided himself on being a rational thinker, someone who could rely on logic and data to make decisions. But the more he thought about the bobcat, the more he began to realize that maybe he had missed something deeper. Elon had always been driven by the idea of pushing boundaries, of conquering the unknown. He had led humanity into space, and he had revolutionized the way people thought about sustainable energy. But for all of his accomplishments, he had never stopped to ask himself why. What was it all for? What did he truly want from the life he had built? Was this encounter with the bobcat a reminder of something he had lost sight of, a deeper connection to the world, to nature, to something more primal than the data and algorithms he spent so much of his time immersed in? As the car pulled into the facility, Elon shook his head, trying to dispel the unsettling thoughts. There was work to be done, after all. But deep inside, he knew he couldn't ignore the call of the bobcat forever. It had triggered something in him, a question he had yet to answer. And so, as the day wore on, Elon's mind remained tethered to that small, wild creature, a bobcat who had inexplicably followed him, and in doing so, seemed to have unlocked something buried deep within himself. He didn't know yet what it meant, but he was determined to find out. The following days passed quickly. Elon's schedule remained packed with meetings, projects, and the ongoing development of his various companies. Yet, in the quiet moments between the chaos, his thoughts would inevitably return to the bobcat. What had it been trying to tell him? And why had it followed him, of all people? It was a question that would soon lead him on a journey, one that would challenge his understanding of the world, and perhaps even change the course of his life. And it all began with a small, unassuming bobcat who wouldn't leave his side. Elon couldn't get the bobcat out of his mind. It had been days since their brief encounter, but the memory of the animal following him, its wide eyes locked on his every move, lingered. It was as if it had become a symbol of something he couldn't quite understand. His life was typically consumed by the challenge of reaching Mars, by rethinking transportation with Tesla, and by ensuring the future of humanity was secure. But the bobcat had opened a door he hadn't expected to see. The following week, Elon decided to take a break from his hectic routine. He cleared his schedule for the next few days, a rare event in his life. For once, he didn't want to think about rockets, AI, or electric vehicles. Instead, he needed to know more about this creature that had become an unexpected fixture in his thoughts. He drove to a nearby wildlife sanctuary, a place that specialized in rehabilitating animals and studying their behaviors. It was a calm, natural setting, far removed from the frenetic pace of Silicon Valley. Elon hoped it might provide him with the clarity he had been searching for. As he stepped out of the car, a gentle breeze greeted him, and the sounds of nature seemed to welcome him into the sanctuary. The area was peaceful, with large oak trees dotting the landscape and patches of wildflowers growing freely. Elon had always appreciated nature but had never truly spent much time in settings like this. His focus had always been on human innovation, not on the natural world around him. He was greeted by the sanctuary's lead biologist, Dr. Nora Lang, a soft-spoken woman with a deep passion for wildlife. They exchanged pleasantries, and Elon quickly explained why he was there. "I'm here because of an unusual experience I had," Elon began, his voice uncharacteristically calm. "I encountered a bobcat a few days ago. It followed me for hours, and I'm not sure why, but I can't stop thinking about it. I want to understand why an animal would do something like that." Dr. Lang looked at him thoughtfully before nodding. Bobcats are incredibly intelligent animals, but they're also fiercely independent. For them to approach a human like that, especially without being raised around people, is unusual. She paused, then added, "What you're describing is quite rare. Bobcats are not typically drawn to humans unless there's a specific reason. It could be curiosity, or perhaps a sense of needing help." Elon's eyes widened slightly. "Needing help," he repeated, intrigued. "Sometimes animals follow people because they're in distress. They might be sick or injured, or perhaps they've been separated from their group. They might see humans as a source of safety or comfort," Dr. Lang explained, her voice filled with knowledge. "It could also be an animal trying to find its place in a world it's not entirely sure about." A shiver ran down Elon's spine. Could the bobcat have been reaching out to him, in its own way? The idea seemed absurd, but it felt strangely plausible given his growing sense of connection to the creature. He continued, "Is there a way to know for sure why it followed me? Could it have been something about me, or was it more about the situation it was in?" Dr. Lang thought for a moment. "I would need to observe the bobcat closely, understand its behavior more fully. If it's in distress, there might be signs, physical or behavioral, that could explain its actions. But, to be honest, without more information or direct observation, it's hard to say. It could have been an instinctive response to a vulnerable situation." Elon nodded, absorbing her words. He felt a strange sense of responsibility, even though he didn't know if the bobcat was in any real danger. But there was something in his gut telling him that this wasn't just a random encounter, it was significant, even if he couldn't articulate why. After the conversation, Dr. Lang took Elon on a tour of the sanctuary, showing him the different areas where they rehabilitated animals. They passed cages with wild birds, a pair of deer grazing peacefully in a nearby meadow, and even a group of foxes who had been rescued from various parts of the state. Each animal had its own story, its own reason for being there. Some had been injured, others orphaned, and some had just wandered too far from their natural habitat. "I understand now why you're so fascinated by nature's resilience," Dr. Lang said as they walked. "Animals have their own way of communicating, and sometimes, we miss their messages. Maybe the bobcat was simply telling you something important." Elon's curiosity deepened. He realized that he had spent so much of his life focusing on human-made solutions to the world's problems, electric cars, Mars colonization, artificial intelligence, but he had neglected the lessons that nature could offer. This encounter with the bobcat was pushing him to rethink his priorities. Perhaps there was something about nature's simplicity and purity that held the answers he had been seeking all along. Over the next few days, Elon continued to think about the bobcat's possible distress. He reached out to wildlife experts across the country, sending them his notes and asking for their insight. Some agreed with Dr. Lang's assessment that the bobcat's behavior could have been linked to a need for help, while others suggested that it might have simply been an animal trying to make sense of its environment. The more he learned, the more he felt a sense of urgency about the situation, even though he had no concrete answers. Elon's days were still filled with his regular duties at Tesla and SpaceX, but in the quiet moments between meetings, his thoughts returned to the bobcat. He had never been one to dwell on things for too long, but this felt different. The creature had followed him for a reason, and that reason was starting to feel intertwined with his own personal journey. It wasn't just about the bobcat anymore. It was about the deeper question that the encounter had raised: what was he truly seeking? The bobcat had followed him because it saw something, perhaps even something he didn't yet understand. Could it be that his own quest for answers, his relentless pursuit of progress, was missing an essential component? Elon sat back in his office chair one afternoon, staring out the window at the bustling city below. His mind was buzzing with thoughts. The road ahead, both for humanity and for himself, was unclear. But one thing was certain: he needed to find out why this bobcat had followed him. There was a lesson there, something about connection, about understanding, about the importance of paying attention to the world around him. And so, with a renewed sense of determination, Elon Musk began a new chapter in his own journey, a journey not just of technological advancement, but of discovery, of connection, and perhaps, of healing. He didn't know where it would lead, but he knew that the answers he sought would be found in the unlikeliest of places, with the unlikeliest of companions. A bobcat had changed everything. And now, it was up to Elon to find out why. Elon couldn't shake the feeling that something significant was at stake. It wasn't just the curiosity about the bobcat anymore, it had become an existential question, one that tugged at his consciousness in a way that nothing had before. The mysteries of space, the potential of artificial intelligence, the dream of a multiplanetary future, all of these things, though important, had somehow faded into the background. The encounter with the bobcat had forced him to confront something more intimate, the need for connection and understanding in a world that increasingly seemed detached from its natural roots. He couldn't deny it any longer. There was something he needed to learn about the wild, something essential that he hadn't fully grasped in his quest for technological advancement. Maybe it was more than just animal behavior or survival instincts, maybe it was something about the bond between life forms, about the way living things, humans included, sought meaning, shelter, and purpose in a world that could often feel cold and indifferent. He spent the following days diving deeper into the nature of bobcats and their social structures. What he found surprised him. Unlike many other big cats, bobcats were solitary by nature. They didn't form groups or prides, unlike lions, or even more social animals like wolves. They hunted alone, roamed alone, and only came together during mating seasons. Their lives were marked by isolation, and their instincts drove them to be incredibly self-sufficient. Yet, there was a strange duality in their behavior. While they were solitary creatures, there were rare instances where they would seek out human company, either out of curiosity or need. It wasn't a usual trait for their species, and it was something that had puzzled scientists for years. Could it be that the bobcat had somehow sensed something in Elon, something that made it feel drawn to him? Elon continued his conversations with experts, wildlife biologists, and animal behaviorists. Each conversation led to more questions than answers, but there was a common thread in the feedback he received: bobcats, like many wild animals, were incredibly sensitive to their environment. And while they were typically wary of humans, they could be incredibly perceptive when it came to reading human energy. "You're talking about the energy of the animal itself," one of the experts told him. "The bobcat might have followed you because it recognized something in you. A calmness, a sense of purpose, or maybe even something deeper that you yourself haven't fully realized yet." The idea felt strange to him. Elon had always prided himself on being a rational thinker, a man of logic. But now, as he sat at his desk, scrolling through the research, he couldn't help but entertain the possibility that the bobcat's behavior wasn't just a random act of curiosity or distress. Perhaps it was something more, something he wasn't yet prepared to understand. Later that week, as if to answer some of the questions plaguing his mind, another unexpected event occurred. Elon was walking through the Tesla factory late one evening when he spotted a familiar sight. There, in the distance, just beyond the parking lot where the electric cars were being charged, stood the bobcat. It was watching him again, its green eyes glimmering in the dim light of the setting sun. This time, there was no hesitation. The bobcat slowly moved toward him, its movements deliberate, yet somehow, still graceful. Elon froze for a moment. His heart raced, not in fear, but in something more akin to wonder. The bobcat had returned, and it was waiting for him. The air felt charged, the kind of silence that comes just before a great revelation. He wasn't sure why, but he felt an overwhelming sense of calm wash over him. This wasn't just an animal following him out of curiosity anymore. This felt like a silent invitation, a challenge to engage, to understand. The bobcat stopped a few feet away from him, its eyes never leaving his face. It sat down slowly, almost as if it were inviting him to sit, to be present with it. And Elon, compelled by an unexplainable urge, crouched down slowly, mirroring the animal's posture. For a long moment, neither of them moved. It was just the two of them, locked in a quiet, almost sacred connection. There was no fear in the bobcat's eyes, no aggression. Just a stillness, as though time had stopped. The world around him seemed to fade away, the factory, the cars, even the endless to-do list that constantly plagued his thoughts. For the first time in years, Elon felt fully present. The weight of his obligations, the endless striving, all of it seemed irrelevant in this moment. In the presence of this wild creature, there was peace. There was no agenda, no project, no goal other than simply existing in the here and now. A soft breeze stirred the air as the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the ground. The bobcat slowly stood up, its gaze still fixed on Elon. Then, with a final glance, it turned and disappeared into the shadows, as silently as it had appeared. Elon remained where he was, his mind racing with thoughts he couldn't fully articulate. Had the bobcat come to him for some reason? Was it truly trying to communicate something to him, or was it simply following its instincts? He stood up slowly, feeling a strange sense of peace and clarity he hadn't expected. The questions were still there, lingering in the back of his mind, but something had shifted. He felt as if he had been given a glimpse into something more profound, something that could shape his understanding of himself and the world around him. As he made his way back to his car, Elon realized that the bobcat wasn't just an anomaly. It was a reminder, a catalyst that had broken through the noise of his busy life, forcing him to slow down and ask the kinds of questions he had long ignored. It had reconnected him with something essential, something raw and primal, yet deeply profound. He didn't know where this journey with the bobcat would take him. But one thing was certain, it had opened a door he could never close again. For the first time in a long while, Elon Musk wasn't just thinking about the future of humanity, about rockets or cars or Mars. He was thinking about the world in a different way, one where the boundaries between human and animal, technology and nature, might not be as fixed as he had once believed. The bobcat had shown him something he had forgotten in his relentless pursuit of progress, the importance of connection, the value of pausing to listen, and the quiet wisdom that nature had to offer. And in that moment, he knew he was about to embark on a journey that would change everything. Elon's mind was consumed with the events of the past few days. He had been searching for breakthroughs in technology, trying to push the boundaries of human achievement, but it was the silence and simplicity of his encounter with the bobcat that had left a lasting imprint on him. It was as if the universe had handed him an unexpected lesson, one that transcended the immediate challenges of his work. The next morning, Elon woke early as usual. His inbox was flooded with emails, his calendar packed with meetings, but his thoughts kept drifting back to the bobcat. What did it want from him? Why had it followed him so persistently? He found himself thinking about the delicate balance between the natural world and the world he was building, a world that seemed increasingly disconnected from the earth that sustained it. At his desk in the Tesla office, Elon sat back in his chair and looked out the window. The view of the city below felt distant, somehow, as though he were a spectator, not a participant. A sense of quiet urgency gripped him. He needed answers, not just to his questions about the bobcat, but to something deeper, something he had neglected for far too long. His thoughts were interrupted by a ping from his phone. It was a message from his assistant. "Mr. Musk, we've just received a report from the SpaceX team. They've made significant progress on the Mars simulation program. We need your input during the meeting later today." Elon read the message, but instead of feeling the usual rush of excitement, a strange sense of hesitation filled him. The pursuit of Mars, his dream of colonizing another planet, had once been his all-consuming mission. But now, after the encounter with the Bobcat, a small voice inside him asked, what if the answers we're searching for are already here? What if the way forward isn't just about reaching for the stars, but about reconnecting with the world we already have? Elon brushed the thought aside, reminding himself that the Mars mission was crucial, that humanity's survival depended on it. But deep down, a part of him knew that something was shifting within him. He had to find out what it meant. Later that day, Elon found himself in a small conference room at Tesla, surrounded by a group of engineers and scientists discussing the next steps in the development of the Tesla Semi. The meeting, which would normally have been full of technical discussions and enthusiastic brainstorming, felt distant and mechanical to him. He listened half-heartedly as his team discussed production timelines and efficiency improvements. The usual excitement about innovation seemed muted, as though it was no longer enough to satisfy his curiosity. His mind wandered again, back to the Bobcat. He stood up abruptly, excusing himself from the meeting. "I'll need to reschedule the next set of meetings," he said, before walking out of the room without looking back. His colleagues exchanged confused glances, but Elon didn't care. He had a different kind of problem now, one that didn't have an immediate solution in the form of technology, profit margins, or next-gen products. He needed to understand the significance of his connection with the Bobcat. That afternoon, Elon found himself back at the wildlife sanctuary, a place that had begun to feel more like a sanctuary for him than a mere research facility. He walked through the sanctuary, seeking out Dr. Nora Lang once again. When she saw him, she greeted him warmly. "Back again, Mr. Musk. I had a feeling you'd return." "I need to understand more," Elon said, his voice earnest. "About the Bobcat. About the way it behaves. And about what it might be trying to tell me." Dr. Lang gave him a long, thoughtful look. "It seems like you've been wrestling with this encounter. What do you think it's trying to tell you?" Elon hesitated. He had spent so much time trying to rationalize the situation, trying to fit it into a framework of logic, but it wasn't working. Finally, he spoke, his voice softer than usual. "I don't know. It's just that, something felt different. I've been so focused on pushing technology, on advancing humanity's future. But the Bobcat, it's like it's reminding me of something. That maybe, before we venture out to the stars, we need to understand the earth beneath our feet." Dr. Lang nodded thoughtfully. "That's a realization many people never come to. Nature, life, animals, they teach us lessons we often overlook in our race to innovate. The Bobcat, in a way, is showing you the value of slowing down, of recognizing that we are a part of something larger, something that doesn't need to be conquered, but understood." Elon absorbed her words. The more he thought about it, the more he felt as though the Bobcat had been trying to teach him this very lesson. The relentless drive to innovate, to expand beyond our world, was admirable, but had it come at the cost of understanding the world that already existed? Had he become so absorbed in his vision of progress that he had lost sight of the bigger picture? "I've spent so much time thinking about the future," Elon said quietly, "that I've forgotten to look at the present." Maybe that's the lesson. Maybe the Bobcat is trying to remind me that the future isn't just something to be created, it's something that's already here, in the way we live with the world. Dr. Lang smiled, a knowing look in her eyes. "It sounds like you're beginning to see things in a new way. Perhaps the answers to our problems, the path forward, isn't just about technology. It's about balance. It's about respect for the natural world, for all forms of life." As the days passed, Elon couldn't stop thinking about the words Dr. Lang had shared with him. The connection he had felt with the Bobcat was starting to make sense in ways he hadn't anticipated. It wasn't about a simple animal following him, it was about understanding his place in the world. He realized that no matter how advanced humanity became, it would always be intertwined with the natural world. To move forward, humanity needed to reconnect with the earth, to live in harmony with the ecosystems that sustained it. That evening, as he sat alone in his office, Elon made a decision. He would take a step back. He would continue his work with SpaceX and Tesla, but he would also make time to explore the lessons of the natural world more deeply. He would ensure that as humanity reached for the stars, it did so with a deep respect for the planet that had given birth to them. And maybe, just maybe, the answers he had been seeking for so long weren't hidden in the stars at all. Perhaps they were waiting for him, patiently, in the silence of a bobcat's gaze. The weeks that followed Elon's encounter with the bobcat were a period of quiet introspection. Despite the whirlwind of projects and groundbreaking innovations continuing at Tesla and SpaceX, Elon found himself less driven by his usual pace of work. The visions of Mars, the electric revolution, and artificial intelligence remained important, but they were no longer his sole focus. The quiet lessons of nature, brought to him through the bobcat's quiet presence, had become his priority. He spent more time visiting the sanctuary, learning from Dr. Lang and other wildlife experts, and considering the ways in which technology and nature could exist together, symbiotically, rather than at odds. It was as if the bobcat had cracked open something deep within him, something he hadn't known was missing. Elon, the visionary entrepreneur, was now becoming Elon, the thoughtful observer of the natural world. One afternoon, while sitting at a cafe near his office, Elon was lost in thought when his assistant, Maria, approached with a message. "Mr. Musk, there's a call for you. It's from one of your investors, but if you're free, I think it might be a good time to chat with him," Maria said, holding out her phone. "Thanks, Maria. I'll take it." Elon pressed the phone to his ear. "Hello. Elon, good to speak with you. It's Steven. I've been reviewing the numbers, and I think we need to have a serious conversation about the trajectory of SpaceX. I've been following your recent initiatives, and I have to ask, are we still on track for our mission to Mars?" Elon's heart sank a little. The question was familiar, and it carried the same weight it always had. The ambitious vision to colonize Mars had always been his guiding star. "Of course, Steven," Elon replied, forcing his tone to sound as confident as always. "We're still pushing forward. We're making incredible strides with the Starship development and the Mars simulation program. Our focus is unwavering." Steven's voice softened, as though he could sense something was off. "I hope so. But I've noticed something. Lately, you haven't been as present in meetings. There's something different about your approach, Elon. You're distracted." Elon closed his eyes for a brief moment, reflecting on the truth in Steven's words. He had been distracted, by the questions the bobcat had raised, by the need to look inward rather than just forward. It wasn't a conversation he was prepared to have with Steven, not yet. "I'm fine, Steven," Elon said, the words sounding hollow even to himself. "We're still on track. I've been thinking a lot about the bigger picture, you know. The mission isn't just about Mars anymore. It's about Earth, too. And how we can balance the future of humanity with the planet that sustains us." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Elon, I don't know if that's the message that we're pushing out. We've built our reputation on going to Mars, on pushing boundaries. If we start talking about balance on Earth, it might confuse our investors. They want certainty, not philosophical musings." Elon took a deep breath. The truth was, he hadn't shared much about his recent reflections with anyone. He had been reluctant to voice his concerns, unsure of how they would be received. But the more he thought about it, the more he realized that the ideas swirling in his head weren't just for him. They were meant to be shared. If he wanted to bring real change, he needed to confront his own assumptions about progress, technology, and the world. "Maybe it's time for a shift, Steven," Elon said, his voice steady. "Maybe we need to rethink what progress looks like. We need to rethink how we approach sustainability, not just in terms of energy, but in terms of how we live on this planet. And yes, we will still go to Mars, but perhaps we need to better understand how we take care of Earth first." There was silence again. Elon could feel the tension hanging in the air. He knew this wasn't a message that would be easily accepted. The investors, his colleagues, and the public were all accustomed to the relentless drive toward the future, to the promise of a better world beyond Earth. But what if the true path forward wasn't just about looking ahead but looking within? Finally, Stephen spoke, his voice measured. Elon, I'll be honest with you. I don't fully understand what you're saying. But you're the visionary. If you believe this shift is the right move, I trust you. Just make sure we're still headed toward Mars. That's all I'm asking. I won't lose sight of that, Elon reassured him. But I'm starting to believe that our journey to Mars starts here, on Earth. We need to make sure that our technologies serve this planet first. And then, we can reach for the stars with a clearer conscience. After the call, Elon sat quietly, staring at the phone in his hand. It had been a challenging conversation, but one that marked the beginning of a shift in how he saw the world. He realized that his journey wasn't just about building something grand and futuristic, it was about reconnecting with the fundamental truths of life, nature, and balance. That evening, after a long day of work, Elon took a walk through his property. He had been spending more time outdoors, soaking in the natural beauty that he had once taken for granted. The sun was setting, casting a warm, golden light over the landscape. As he walked, his thoughts turned again to the Bobcat. Was it a symbol of his need to reconnect with something deeper? Was it trying to show him that in the rush to build something beyond Earth, he had lost sight of what was here? As if on cue, there it was again. The Bobcat, standing just beyond the edge of the forest, watching him silently. Elon stopped in his tracks, his heart skipping a beat. It was as though the Bobcat had been waiting for him, ready to share its silent wisdom once more. This time, Elon didn't hesitate. He walked toward it slowly, respectfully, as though acknowledging the importance of the moment. The Bobcat didn't move, only continued to watch him with those intelligent, piercing eyes. There was no rush, no urgency, just an understanding between them, an unspoken connection. For the first time in a long while, Elon didn't feel the need to chase after anything. He simply stood there, grounded, fully present in the moment. The Bobcat's presence was not an answer, but a reminder. A reminder that sometimes, the most important thing we can do is stop and listen. And as the last light of day faded into twilight, Elon Musk realized that the answers he had been seeking, about progress, about technology, and about humanity's future, were already waiting for him, if only he could learn to hear the quiet wisdom of the world around him. As the days turned into weeks, Elon's transformation began to subtly impact not just his perspective on life, but also his approach to business. He found himself more reflective in meetings, less driven by the adrenaline of competition and more focused on the balance of his work with the world around him. His newfound respect for nature, prompted by his encounter with the Bobcat, started to weave itself into his decisions. Tesla's next major project, the new generation of electric vehicles, was on track. But Elon was no longer solely fixated on its technological aspects. His vision now included a more sustainable, integrated approach. He wanted the vehicles to not only be efficient but to embody harmony with the planet, materials, energy usage, and the entire life cycle of the product would need to reflect this new mindset. For once, he wasn't merely thinking about the end product. He was thinking about the journey. One of his longtime colleagues, Sarah, who had worked alongside him for years, noticed the change. "Elon," she said one day as they sat in his office reviewing blueprints for the new vehicle, "there's something different about you lately. You're talking about things like carbon offsets, rewilding, and environmental consciousness more than ever before. This isn't the Elon I've known." Elon smiled, though it was tinged with a sense of humility that wasn't often seen in him. He leaned back in his chair, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. "Maybe I'm finally understanding that there's no innovation without connection. We can't just take from the earth and expect it to keep giving. If we're going to reach the stars, we need to care for the planet we're already on." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "You mean the same Elon Musk who pushed relentlessly for Mars and Earth-shattering technologies?" This is new. He chuckled lightly. Maybe, but I think I've been so obsessed with the what's next that I lost sight of what's right in front of us. The future isn't just about technology, it's about how we coexist with the natural world. Sarah studied him for a moment, then nodded. All right, let's take this idea and run with it. If we want to truly innovate, we'll need to integrate sustainability at every level, from production to the materials we use. It's going to be a challenge, but I think it's the direction we need to go. Elon nodded, feeling a sense of quiet satisfaction at her response. For the first time, he didn't feel the need to prove his vision to the world. He knew the right people, those who shared the same ideals, would see it for what it was, a deeper understanding of how technology could harmonize with nature. Meanwhile, back at the sanctuary, Dr. Lang had noticed the shift in Elon as well. The occasional visits were becoming more frequent, and he was no longer just an observer, he was engaged. They discussed everything from ecosystem restoration to species conservation, and Elon's questions were no longer about how humans could dominate nature with technology, but rather how they could protect it, how they could understand it on a deeper level. Dr. Lang had become an unexpected mentor, one who offered guidance not just for the world of animals but for how technology could intersect with the Earth. During one of their discussions, Elon shared a thought that had been on his mind for days. I've been thinking, he said, as they walked through the forest near the sanctuary, about how we could use the technology we're developing to actually help reverse some of the damage we've done. Maybe we could develop systems that help restore ecosystems, monitor wildlife habitats, and protect endangered species more effectively. Rather than just focusing on space, we could use our resources here to fix things at home. Dr. Lang smiled at him, her eyes reflecting pride. That's the kind of thinking the world needs, Elon. It's easy to look outward and focus on the grand future, on Mars, on artificial intelligence, but we've got to fix our own backyard first. Technology can't just be a tool of exploration, it can also be a tool of preservation. Elon stopped walking for a moment, his gaze fixed on the horizon. That's what the Bobcat was trying to tell me, wasn't it? That before we can go beyond, we need to go within. We need to restore balance here, before we try to reach for the stars. Dr. Lang nodded. Exactly. The Bobcat has been a guide, in a sense. It's helping you see that balance isn't just about taking, it's about giving, restoring, and understanding. Maybe the answer isn't about conquering new frontiers. Maybe it's about learning to live better with the one we have. Elon's thoughts were interrupted by a sudden realization. The more he dwelled on the concept of balance, the more he could see how it applied to every aspect of his life, from his work at Tesla to his ambitions at SpaceX. For so long, he had been pushing forward with no pause, chasing bigger and more complex goals. He had been chasing perfection without realizing that perfection was a flawed concept. True success, he now understood, came with patience, understanding, and compromise. One evening, after a long day of meetings and phone calls, Elon sat alone in his study, reflecting on the past. His mind wandered back to his childhood, to the early days when he had first dreamt of changing the world. He remembered reading about the great explorers, the inventors, and the scientists who had shaped history, and how he had wanted to do the same. But what struck him now, looking back, was that he had never stopped to question the cost of progress. He had always believed that pushing forward relentlessly was the only way to achieve greatness. Now, with the Bobcat's presence still lingering in his thoughts, he realized that true greatness wasn't just about forward motion, it was about understanding where you were, appreciating where you had come from, and knowing when to stop and listen. The following morning, Elon decided to take a step further in his commitment to a more balanced future. He called his team together at Tesla to discuss a new initiative, a partnership with wildlife conservation organizations to create a groundbreaking project focused on environmental restoration. The goal was simple: use the technology Tesla was developing, from energy solutions to electric transportation, to actively support and rejuvenate ecosystems around the world. The room buzzed with excitement as Elon outlined the project. We've spent years creating groundbreaking technologies to advance humanity's future, but now it's time to use them to help preserve our planet's future. This will be our legacy, not just electric cars, but a true partnership with the Earth. Sarah, standing at the front of the room, raised her hand. This could be huge. It's a perfect example of how Tesla can be a leader in not just technology, but in ethical progress. How we move forward, how we live, is just as important as the innovations we create. Elon looked around the room at his team, seeing their enthusiasm mirrored in his own heart. The journey had changed him in ways he had never expected, but now, more than ever, he felt as though he was exactly where he needed to be. He had found balance between ambition and humility, between exploration and preservation. And it was just the beginning. As the sun dipped below the horizon that evening, Elon stood in the quiet sanctuary of nature, looking out at the world he was beginning to understand anew. He wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time, he felt at peace with the unknown. The Bobcat, ever the silent teacher, had given him a gift, the gift of quiet reflection. And with that, he was ready to face the challenges ahead, knowing that whatever the future held, it would be a future built on respect, balance, and a deep connection to the Earth. And so, Elon Musk had begun to chart a new course, not just for the stars, but for the Earth that had always sustained him. Elon Musk's days had taken on a quieter rhythm since his revelations about balance and the interconnectedness of life. His commitment to integrating sustainability into all his projects had sparked fresh energy at Tesla and SpaceX. What had once been a relentless push toward technological domination now felt like a conversation, one that Elon wanted to have with the planet, not just for it. His team, initially shocked by his more reflective approach, had now fully embraced this new direction. Tesla's engineering department was working overtime, creating new, advanced battery technologies that could be repurposed for environmental restoration projects, while SpaceX was beginning to explore ways to offset carbon emissions during its launches. The more Elon thought about it, the more he realized how interconnected everything truly was. One morning, as Elon walked across the Tesla factory floor, he couldn't help but notice how much had changed. The buzz of machinery and the hum of the robots felt different. There was a sense of purpose in the air that hadn't been there before. His employees weren't just making electric cars anymore. They were part of something bigger, something more profound. They were creating a future that respected the Earth. Elon stopped to chat with one of his lead engineers, Nadia, who was overseeing the development of a new energy-efficient battery. "How's the new prototype coming along?" Elon asked, leaning against a workbench. "It's looking good," Nadia said, her eyes sparkling with the same intensity he had once had when tackling problems. "This new model is more efficient than ever. It's not just about electric cars anymore. We're building something that will power entire cities, support renewable energy grids, and help bring more remote regions into the fold of sustainable living." Elon smiled. "Exactly. This is what we've always been working toward, Nadia. And now, we're doing it with the future of the planet in mind, not just the future of technology." She nodded, her enthusiasm palpable. "It feels different, Elon. More important." He paused for a moment, staring at the half-finished battery. "It is. The world is changing, and we need to be a part of that change. Not just in terms of technology, but in terms of our relationship with the Earth. We need to live in a way that complements nature, not just use it." Nadia looked thoughtful. "You know, we're already talking about how to repurpose old car batteries into energy storage for off-grid locations. It's a small step, but it's a step toward the future." "It's more than a step," Elon said, smiling. "It's a revolution. And it's just the beginning." Later that afternoon, Elon drove to the sanctuary once again, his thoughts clouded with new ideas. The urgency to innovate had never left him, but the urgency had changed. It was no longer about creating something new for the sake of progress, it was about creating something that would last, something that would sustain both humanity and the planet for generations to come. As he pulled up to the entrance, the familiar sight of the sanctuary, its wild expanse, its open fields and forested areas, greeted him with a sense of calm that had become a balm for his once restless spirit. The Bobcat had not been seen for a while, and Elon wondered if it was a sign of something, some deeper change. But today, his purpose was clear. He walked through the woods toward the area where Dr. Lang often conducted her fieldwork. The sanctuary was vast, and as he walked, the air felt fresh and pure, a stark reminder of the beauty of the natural world that humans had been losing touch with. His footsteps were quiet, almost reverent, as he pondered how to reconcile the progress he had made with his new commitment to the planet. Dr. Lang greeted him with a warm smile as she emerged from behind a row of trees. "Elon," she said, her voice soft but filled with warmth. "I was wondering when you'd come by." "I've been thinking a lot," Elon said, taking a seat on a nearby rock. "I think we're on the verge of something big, something that could truly change the way we approach our relationship with the planet. But I need your help to take this to the next level." Dr. Lang sat beside him, her curiosity piqued. "What do you have in mind?" "I want to build a project that focuses on ecosystem restoration, not just research, but real-world action. I want to use the technology we have, and the technology we're developing, to restore areas of the world that need it most. We can combine sustainable energy solutions with conservation efforts. We can work with local communities to make sure this is a global effort." She considered his words carefully, her eyes lighting up with excitement. "That's a powerful idea, Elon. It's not just about conservation, it's about creating a new way of living. I'm all in." Elon nodded, feeling a surge of energy at her response. "We're going to need partnerships with wildlife conservation organizations, government agencies, and local communities to make this work. But I believe that the key to preserving this planet is getting people to understand that their future is tied to the Earth's future." Dr. Lang smiled again, her voice warm with optimism. "The world needs this kind of thinking now more than ever." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of meetings, brainstorming sessions, and planning. Elon and Dr. Lang, along with the Tesla and SpaceX teams, set to work creating a blueprint for the new project, one that combined Tesla's advanced solar and battery technologies with initiatives for rewilding, habitat restoration, and sustainable agriculture. The project wasn't just about saving endangered species or cleaning up pollution, it was about creating an entirely new framework for how humanity interacted with nature. The more Elon thought about it, the clearer his vision became. What if the entire world could be powered by renewable energy, not just in urban areas, but in rural, remote locations where natural ecosystems thrived? What if these areas could serve as models for sustainable living, where technology and nature coexisted in harmony? And what if this model could be replicated globally, creating a new standard for how to protect and preserve the Earth? The possibilities were endless. But it would take time, resources, and a level of cooperation that Elon had never seen before. In his quiet moments, Elon would return to the sanctuary, hoping to catch a glimpse of the Bobcat. The animal, which had been such a powerful symbol of his awakening, was now a ghost in the woods, slipping in and out of view. Elon found himself smiling whenever he thought of the Bobcat, knowing that it was still out there, perhaps still watching, perhaps still guiding him. One evening, as he walked alone, his thoughts wandering, he felt the brush of wind through the trees. It was the same familiar feeling, the sensation that he wasn't alone, that the land was watching, waiting. As if on cue, he looked up and saw the Bobcat once more, perched on a rock just beyond the trees. It stared at him, its eyes piercing and knowing. For a moment, Elon just stood there, silent. The connection was unspoken but profound. "Thank you," he whispered into the wind. The Bobcat didn't move, but its gaze never wavered. And for the first time in his life, Elon Musk understood. The true path forward wasn't about conquering nature, it was about listening to it, learning from it, and living in harmony with it. The journey had only just begun, but now, he knew it was a journey worth taking. Elon stood at the front of a packed auditorium, the soft hum of anticipation vibrating in the air. It was a crisp fall morning, and the annual Tesla Innovation Summit was in full swing. The team had worked tirelessly over the last several months, and now was the moment to share the next great chapter of the company's journey with the world. But this time, it wasn't just about electric cars, rocket ships, or the latest battery technology. No, today was different. Today, Elon was unveiling a vision that reached far beyond anything he had previously imagined. This wasn't just about creating better products, it was about changing the very relationship humanity had with the planet. He stepped up to the microphone, looking out at the eager faces before him, investors, engineers, journalists, and environmentalists, all there because they believed in Tesla's mission. But today, his words would carry a different weight. "Thank you all for being here," Elon began, his voice steady but filled with a new sense of purpose. "We've spent over a decade building the future of transportation, of space exploration, and of clean energy. But there's one thing we've overlooked: the planet we're trying to save. Today, I want to talk about a new chapter, a chapter where Tesla's innovation isn't just about the technology, it's about how we restore, protect, and live in harmony with the Earth." The crowd fell silent, surprised at the unexpected tone. Elon paused, letting his words settle in. "I know," he continued, a slight smile tugging at his lips, "we've been focused on breaking barriers, on advancing technology for the sake of progress. But now, the time has come for a new mission, one that aligns with the lessons we've learned, and the responsibility we have. We are launching a new initiative that will combine everything Tesla has learned over the years, solar energy, electric vehicles, and our advanced batteries, to support ecosystem restoration and environmental protection projects on a global scale." A murmur of excitement rippled through the room, and Elon could see that his audience was beginning to understand the magnitude of what he was saying. But he wasn't done yet. "This project, which we're calling Tesla Green, will partner with conservation organizations, local communities, and governments around the world to integrate cutting-edge technology into efforts to restore natural habitats, combat deforestation, and promote sustainable agriculture. Our goal isn't just to change how the world drives, it's to change how the world lives." Elon felt a rush of emotion as he looked out over the sea of faces, some skeptical, some curious, but many hopeful. For the first time in a long while, he wasn't pushing a product or a new venture. He was inviting the world to join him in something much bigger, a movement toward restoring balance between humanity and the Earth. "I'm excited about what we can achieve together," he said. "Because if we're going to create a sustainable future, it's not enough to build new technology. We need to repair what has been damaged, to live in a way that respects and nurtures the planet that sustains us." The crowd erupted into applause, and Elon allowed himself a moment to soak it all in. The applause wasn't just for him or Tesla, it was for a future that seemed possible, a future where innovation and conservation could coexist. The weeks following the summit were a whirlwind of activity. Tesla's new initiative was met with a mixture of skepticism and enthusiasm, but Elon was resolute. His team had already begun mapping out pilot projects in regions suffering from extreme environmental degradation. They were working with conservationists to build sustainable energy systems that could power reforestation efforts and restore damaged ecosystems. One of the first projects to launch was in the Amazon rainforest. Tesla's solar panels and energy storage systems were being used to provide electricity to remote villages, reducing the need for logging and allowing local communities to protect their land. In turn, Tesla was helping reforest areas that had been decimated by illegal logging, providing both the technology and the resources to begin healing the land. Dr. Lang, who had been instrumental in guiding Elon's thinking throughout this process, traveled to the Amazon to oversee the project's implementation. She kept in close contact with him, sending regular updates and photos of the progress. The first images that came back were of lush green landscapes, slowly recovering as Tesla's energy systems powered new sustainable agriculture initiatives, turning barren plots of land back into productive, thriving ecosystems. As Elon reviewed the reports, he couldn't help but feel a sense of awe. The world was beginning to change, and it was happening not because of his technology alone, but because of the partnerships Tesla had forged with local communities, scientists, and conservationists. Despite the success of the project, there were still obstacles ahead. Elon knew that changing the world didn't happen overnight, especially when the scale was as vast as this. The political challenges were significant. Not all governments were on board with the idea of large-scale environmental restoration. There were also critics who viewed Tesla's push for sustainability as just another marketing ploy. But Elon wasn't deterred by the naysayers. He had learned over the years that every monumental shift in history had its detractors. It was the impact that mattered. He was reminded of the Bobcat. As elusive as it had been, its presence had been constant in his thoughts. The animal had shown him something invaluable, the power of quiet resilience. Just as the Bobcat had navigated the forest with grace and persistence, Elon knew that he had to do the same. The journey would be long, filled with uncertainty and resistance. But it was a journey worth taking. One evening, as he sat on the porch of his home, watching the sunset with a cup of tea in hand, Elon reflected on how far he had come. The weight of his ambition had always felt like a burden, but now it felt more like a calling. He had started out seeking to change the world through technology, but he now understood that the real change came from understanding the delicate balance between progress and preservation. His phone buzzed, snapping him out of his thoughts. It was a message from Dr. Lang. "Elon, I wanted to share something with you. The reforestation project in the Amazon is showing incredible promise. We're already seeing signs of the forest recovering. The wildlife is returning, and the communities are beginning to thrive. The project has the potential to be a model for the world." Elon read the message twice, letting the words sink in. For the first time in his life, he felt that his work was not only changing the world, it was saving it. He gazed out at the horizon once more, the sky painted with hues of orange and purple. The future was no longer a distant, uncertain thing, it was a living, breathing reality, and it was within his reach. More importantly, it was within all of humanity's reach. And together, they were going to build something truly remarkable, a world where innovation and nature could coexist, a world that honored both progress and preservation. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Elon stood, feeling the quiet power of the moment. The journey ahead was still long, but for the first time, he knew the path was right. And, somewhere in the distance, he imagined the Bobcat watching, still guiding him, still a reminder of the quiet, enduring power of nature. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The world was beginning to take notice of the Tesla Green initiative. News outlets across the globe were covering the groundbreaking environmental restoration projects, and Elon was seeing firsthand the ripple effects of the work he had started. What had once seemed like a personal vision had turned into a global movement. Governments, corporations, and local communities were starting to work together in ways that had seemed impossible just a year ago. The press coverage was overwhelmingly positive, but there were still plenty of doubters. Some believed that Elon Musk's focus on environmental conservation was just another business strategy to boost Tesla's market value, a publicity stunt to draw attention away from the company's profits and its many controversies. Others feared that Tesla's reach, now expanding beyond electric vehicles and into ecological restoration, might be overstepping its bounds. Elon had expected this. After all, the road to real change was never easy, and the world was still very much divided on how to solve the planet's environmental crises. There was a great deal of fear around change, particularly when it meant re-evaluating long-held beliefs about industry, consumption, and progress. But Elon had come to understand that the only way forward was to keep pushing, even when the path ahead was unclear. It had been nearly a month since the first major reforestation efforts were launched, and the results were already startling. Reports were flooding in from across the globe. In the Amazon, entire sections of the forest that had once been lost to illegal logging were beginning to show signs of life again. Species that had been on the brink of extinction were slowly returning. Communities that had been devastated by deforestation were seeing the results of sustainable farming techniques that didn't harm the environment. The Tesla solar panels and energy storage units were proving to be a lifeline, providing power to remote areas that had long been cut off from the grid. But it wasn't just the projects in the Amazon that were creating change. Tesla's green initiative had expanded to include several other regions, from the Australian outback to Africa's savannas. Elon knew that each success, no matter how small, was a sign that the vision he had was working. The question was, could they scale this vision in time to make a lasting impact on the world's largest ecosystems? As Elon sat in a conference room in one of Tesla's headquarters, surrounded by a team of scientists, environmentalists, and engineers, he was reminded of the magnitude of the task ahead. His mind was sharp, focused, but there was an underlying feeling of fatigue. Change, real change, wasn't easy, and the pressure was mounting. But this was what he had set out to do. He had spent his entire career defying the odds, breaking through barriers. Now, he was tasked with doing something even bigger, healing the planet. "We've got great data coming in from the first round of projects," Dr. Lang said, her eyes bright with excitement. "The Amazon project is exceeding expectations, and we're seeing similar results in other regions. I'm confident that the framework we've developed can be replicated in more places. The question is, how do we scale up quickly enough to make a real impact?" Elon nodded, his fingers tapping lightly on the table as he thought through the problem. "We need to bring more stakeholders into the fold. Governments are essential, but we need businesses. Every major corporation needs to see the value in this. The more resources we have, the faster we can roll out new projects. But, more importantly, we need to make the world see this not as a green initiative, but as an imperative. We're not just saving ecosystems, we're saving humanity's future." One of the engineers chimed in, "We're working on expanding Tesla's solar grids and battery systems. If we can develop more modular systems, we could deploy them in more areas faster, lowering the cost for local communities to get involved." "Good," Elon replied. "Let's prioritize that. I want the next phase of expansion to be about speed. We can't afford to wait." That evening, as Elon sat in his office alone, staring at a map of the world with Tesla's project sites marked in red, he reflected on how far he had come. It wasn't just the number of projects he had started, or the billions of dollars he had invested. It was the connection he had developed with the world he was working to protect. It was in moments like this, in quiet solitude, that he thought of the Bobcat. The Bobcat hadn't been seen in months. Elon had stopped making trips to the sanctuary as often as he once had, focused now on the massive undertaking that Tesla Green had become. But every time he thought about the Bobcat, a sense of calm washed over him. That elusive creature had taught him something he hadn't fully grasped until now, that the greatest change came not from rushing, but from understanding the world around him and letting it guide him. A few weeks later, Elon was back at the sanctuary. He had made a commitment to himself to return to the place that had inspired him to see the world through new eyes. It wasn't just about the projects anymore, it was about reconnecting with the natural world, finding that same peace he had experienced when he had first encountered the Bobcat. He walked through the forest, taking in the crisp air and the rustle of leaves beneath his feet. The land was alive, and for the first time, Elon truly felt at peace. He had spent so much of his life chasing the future, but here, in this moment, he realized that the future wasn't something to chase. It was something to nurture. After what seemed like hours, Elon finally reached the clearing where he had first seen the Bobcat. He stood there for a long time, waiting, wondering if it would show itself. And then, just as the sun dipped below the horizon, he saw it. The Bobcat emerged from the shadows, its golden eyes meeting his with a quiet intensity. For a long moment, they simply stood there, the Bobcat watching him as if it knew exactly what was on his mind. There were no words. There didn't need to be. Elon felt an overwhelming sense of connection to the land, to the animal, and to the work he had set out to do. He took a deep breath, the air cool and refreshing. "Thank you," he whispered into the wind. The Bobcat, silent and majestic, turned and disappeared into the woods. Elon returned to the world with renewed purpose, driven not just by his technological ambitions, but by the understanding that the future could not be built without protecting the very things that made life on Earth possible. And as the Tesla Green initiative continued to expand, Elon found himself relying less on his ideas and more on his instincts, on the lessons he had learned from the Bobcat, from the forest, and from his own journey. The path ahead was still long. But Elon knew that he wasn't walking it alone. He had the support of a growing movement, a movement dedicated to restoring balance to the Earth, one project at a time. The world had begun to shift. There were whispers in the halls of global corporations, in boardrooms, and among policymakers. The idea of a new kind of innovation, one that didn't just serve human interests but protected the very ecosystems that supported all life, was taking hold. And it wasn't just Tesla leading the charge anymore. Other companies had started to take notice of what Elon Musk and his team had started. There was a growing realization that sustainability wasn't just a buzzword or a trend, it was the future. Still, there was much work to be done. While Elon had pushed Tesla Green further into the global spotlight, and their first major success stories were encouraging, the path was still full of obstacles. The sheer scale of what he was trying to achieve was immense. To restore ecosystems, to heal the planet, required cooperation on an unprecedented scale. And for that, more allies would be needed. As Elon sat in his office late into the evening, the dim light from his desk lamp illuminating his tired eyes, he thought about the bigger picture. He had always been a man of vision, but this was a vision that stretched far beyond the walls of his companies. This was about the future of the Earth itself. The world was beginning to wake up, but it wasn't enough. Not yet. A call interrupted his thoughts. It was Dr. Lang. She had been on the ground overseeing Tesla Green's newest project in Africa, a large-scale initiative aimed at restoring the savannas of southern Africa that had been ravaged by overgrazing, deforestation, and climate change. The project was ambitious, utilizing Tesla's solar and battery systems to power sustainable agriculture while also reintroducing native species that had disappeared from the region over the past decades. Elon, I wanted to give you an update on the Southern Africa project. We've made huge strides in the past few weeks. The solar grids are up and running, and the local farmers have already begun to switch to more sustainable practices. We're starting to see wildlife return, too. It's a small success, but it's proof that what we're doing is working, Dr. Lang said, her voice filled with excitement. Elon smiled. That's great news, Lang. Keep pushing forward. We need to show the world that this can be done, on a large scale. Dr. Lang continued, we've also made connections with local governments and international conservation groups. There's real momentum here. But there's one thing we need to consider, we've been focused on restoring ecosystems, but we haven't really addressed the role of local communities in these efforts. We need to do more to ensure that the people who live in these areas are not just beneficiaries of the projects, but active participants. Elon leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. Dr. Lang was right. Tesla Green had been successful in implementing technological solutions, but the long-term success of their projects would depend on community involvement. He had learned that from the Amazon project. If the people didn't see the value in the restoration efforts, it wouldn't last. You're absolutely right, Elon said, his voice firm. We need to build relationships with these communities. We need to give them the tools and resources to lead the way. Let's get a plan in place to integrate community-driven solutions into our projects. We can't do this alone. The next few weeks were a blur of meetings and travel. Elon visited Africa, seeing firsthand the progress of the savanna restoration. The solar grids powered local villages, schools, and even health clinics, providing a much-needed lifeline to people who had long struggled with unreliable power sources. Tesla's involvement was changing lives, but there was still work to be done. He spent time in the local villages, speaking with farmers who had already adopted sustainable practices. They were eager to learn, to work with the land in a way that didn't deplete it. Tesla's technology had given them the tools they needed to improve their crops without resorting to destructive methods. But now, it was time for the next step, helping them become stewards of the land in the truest sense, not just recipients of aid. Elon sat down with local leaders, conservationists, and environmental experts, hammering out a plan to integrate community management into the restoration efforts. It wasn't enough to just restore the land, they needed to ensure that the people who lived there were the ones who would sustain it. Back in the US, news of the African project's success began to spread. The media was buzzing with stories of how technology and conservation were coming together to create real, lasting change. But as much as the success of Tesla Green in Africa was inspiring, Elon knew that the real test was yet to come. They needed to scale their efforts, to expand the reach of Tesla Green to other ecosystems on the brink of collapse. From the Great Barrier Reef in Australia to the coastal wetlands of Southeast Asia, there were countless environments in need of urgent attention. One evening, while walking around the Tesla campus in California, Elon received a call from an unexpected source. It was a personal call from the President of the United States. "Mr. Musk, I've been following your work with Tesla Green, and I have to say, I'm impressed. Your efforts to restore the planet have the potential to change the course of history. I'd like to explore ways that the federal government can support your initiatives, whether through policy, funding, or collaboration." Elon was momentarily stunned. He had always been a maverick, operating outside of traditional systems. But the idea of the US government offering support for Tesla Green was a monumental shift. "I appreciate that, Mr. President. But we need more than just funding, we need systemic change. We need policies that incentivize conservation and sustainability on a global scale. We need governments, businesses, and individuals to realize that saving the planet isn't optional, it's necessary." The president was silent for a moment, considering Elon's words. "I couldn't agree more. Let's set up a meeting. It's time to start thinking long-term, and I believe Tesla can help lead the way." The meeting with the president was held just a few days later. It was a historic moment, one that Elon knew would have far-reaching implications. The conversation was a deep dive into how governments and corporations could collaborate to combat climate change, restore ecosystems, and promote sustainability. The president was receptive to Elon's ideas, and they discussed everything from carbon credits to incentivizing large-scale reforestation and the development of green technologies. "I know this will be a long fight, but it's one we have to win," Elon said as the meeting wrapped up. "This is bigger than all of us. We can't afford to fail." The president nodded. "We're in this together, Elon. Let's make it happen." As Elon left the White House, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. The path ahead was still uncertain, and there were countless obstacles to overcome. But for the first time in his career, he felt that he wasn't fighting alone. The world was beginning to realize that the future was not just about technological innovation, it was about how humanity chose to live in balance with the planet. Back at Tesla, the teams were already preparing for the next phase of the Tesla Green initiative. They had partnerships in place with governments, conservationists, and local communities around the world. The future was taking shape before his eyes, and Elon was determined to see it through. He wasn't just building electric cars or rockets anymore, he was building a future where technology and nature thrive together. But even as the world was watching, Elon couldn't shake the feeling that he was still on a journey. It wasn't just about the Earth. It was about humanity itself. And just as the Bobcat had followed him on his path to understanding, he knew there was still much to learn, much to explore. The journey had only just begun. The momentum behind Tesla Green was undeniable. Across the globe, people were beginning to see the larger picture. The world wasn't just watching Tesla's technological innovations, they were watching the way those innovations were being used to heal the planet. The savannas of southern Africa were a shining example, but now there were new regions to consider, new ecosystems in danger of collapse. Elon knew that the only way to truly change the world was to act faster, to galvanize the global community into urgent action. He had often said that to change the future, one had to create the future, and now that future was beginning to unfold. The conversation was shifting. People were no longer asking if it was possible to restore ecosystems, they were asking how soon it could happen. The world was waking up. But there was a catch. While many were inspired, many others were still stuck in the past, reluctant to embrace the changes that Tesla Green was ushering in. The old guard, the industries that had long profited from the destruction of ecosystems, were fighting back. There were lobbying groups, media campaigns, and even corporate interests aligned against Elon's vision. They painted him as a radical dreamer, an idealist who was too focused on environmental concerns and not enough on economic growth. Elon knew this wasn't going to be an easy fight. It was a battle on multiple fronts, political, social, and economic. But he wasn't one to back down from a challenge. The first step in turning the tide came with a call to action. Elon knew that it wasn't just enough to show success stories. He had to rally the masses. He needed to inspire people, governments, and corporations to take responsibility for the future of the planet. And for that, he would need more than just his usual approach. This time, it was about a global coalition, a uniting force. Elon stood before the camera in Tesla's global headquarters, ready to give the speech that he hoped would change the course of the movement. He was calm, collected, his mind clear. There was no room for hesitation. Hello, everyone. I'm Elon Musk, and I've dedicated my life to creating a better future for all of us. But I'm here today not just as the CEO of Tesla, but as someone who believes that we're at a crossroads in human history. Our planet is facing a crisis. Climate change, deforestation, pollution, these issues threaten everything we hold dear. But I believe that we have the power to change that. This isn't just about saving the Amazon or restoring the savannas. It's about saving humanity's future. We have the technology, we have the tools, and most importantly, we have the ability to make it happen. I'm calling on governments, corporations, and individuals around the world to come together. This is our chance to heal the earth, not tomorrow, not next year, but now. We can't afford to wait. The time for action is now. The choice is ours. Will we rise to the occasion, or will we allow greed and short-term thinking to win? I believe in the future of this planet, and I believe that we can change the course of history. But we can't do it alone. We need you. Join us. Together, we can restore balance and create a future that's worth fighting for. Elon's words rang out, echoing across the internet, TV broadcasts, and social media. The call to action was simple yet powerful, the planet needed help, and the time to act was now. The response was immediate. People all over the world, from environmental activists to concerned citizens, rallied behind him. But even more important were the messages that came from governments, businesses, and influential global leaders. They too were beginning to understand the urgency. The President of the United States issued a statement later that evening, pledging full support for Tesla Green's global restoration efforts. The time for change is now. We stand with Elon Musk and Tesla in their fight to restore the Earth. This is not just a moment in history, this is a movement. And the United States is proud to be a part of it. Across Europe, Asia, and South America, countries began to make similar commitments. Major corporations in oil, gas, and even agriculture started announcing shifts in their policies, pledging to reduce their carbon footprints and contribute to large-scale restoration projects. The idea of green growth was slowly replacing the old paradigm of unchecked industrial expansion. In the months that followed, Tesla Green expanded rapidly. New projects were launched in Australia, Indonesia, Southeast Asia, and the Mediterranean. The goal wasn't just to restore isolated ecosystems but to create an interconnected web of regeneration that could withstand the pressures of climate change. Tesla's solar power grids became a symbol of the future, sustainable, decentralized energy sources that didn't harm the Earth. But despite all the progress, Elon knew that there was still a long road ahead. The opposition hadn't disappeared, and the powerful forces resisting change were still active. They had money, influence, and an established system that relied on the exploitation of resources. But Elon was determined not to give up. It was during one of his late-night brainstorming sessions with the Tesla Green team that the idea for a global summit was born. Elon had always believed in the power of collaboration. After all, much of Tesla's success had come from partnerships with other tech companies, governments, and research institutions. But now, the challenge was far bigger than any single company or initiative. This was a global mission, and if humanity was to succeed in saving the planet, it would take a unified effort. Tesla would host a global summit in which leaders from all sectors, government, business, science, and civil society, could come together to discuss and set the framework for a global movement to restore ecosystems and combat climate change. The summit would serve as a launching pad for further collaboration and action, bringing together the best minds to tackle the challenges ahead. The global summit was scheduled to take place in the fall, and in the weeks leading up to it, excitement was building. Influential figures from around the world were confirmed to attend, and the media was abuzz with anticipation. Elon knew that the summit was more than just a chance to discuss ideas, it was a chance to solidify a vision that had started small but now had the potential to become a global movement. As the day of the summit arrived, Elon found himself reflecting on the long journey that had brought him to this point. From the Bobcat he had encountered in the woods to the global coalition he had helped form, he had come to understand something that had eluded him for years. The key to real change wasn't just about technology or policy, it was about people. It was about bringing together those who believed in a better future and helping them see that they weren't alone. As he took the stage to open the summit, Elon felt the weight of history pressing on him. This was his moment to lead. And as the room filled with energy and hope, he couldn't help but feel a sense of excitement. The world was finally waking up. The future was no longer just a distant dream, it was something tangible, something they could all create together. The global summit was set in a grand hall in San Francisco, the heart of innovation. As the morning sun streamed through the glass walls, the energy in the room was palpable. Tesla's headquarters had transformed into a vibrant meeting space for changemakers, visionaries, and leaders from around the world. The goal of the summit was clear: to unite the brightest minds in business, science, policy, and activism to create a comprehensive, global strategy for environmental restoration and sustainable growth. Elon stood at the podium, looking out at the sea of faces. These were the people who would shape the future, the people who would help chart a course toward a world where technology worked in harmony with nature. The excitement in the room was electric, and the stakes were higher than ever. As he prepared to speak, he couldn't help but reflect on how far he had come, how far the movement had come, from the humble beginnings of Tesla Green to this very moment. "Welcome, everyone," Elon began, his voice steady but filled with the passion that had fueled his work for years. "Thank you for being here today. We're on the brink of something monumental. But before we begin, I want to remind you of something. This isn't just about technology, about Tesla, or about any one company. This is about all of us, and our shared future. The Earth is not just a resource to be used, it is a living, breathing system that sustains us all. And if we don't act now, we will lose what we've always taken for granted." The room grew quiet. Every eye was on him. "I don't have all the answers. None of us do. But together, we have the ability to change the course of history. We can build a future that works for the planet, for humanity, for all living creatures. But we have to work together, and we have to act fast. We're not just talking about climate change, we're talking about survival. This is the most important challenge humanity has ever faced." A murmur of agreement rippled through the room. Elon continued, Tesla Green is just the beginning. But the power of innovation, the power of technology, cannot stand alone. We need new policies, new ways of thinking, new partnerships. We need action on a scale that's never been seen before. This summit will be our turning point. It will be the moment we decide what kind of future we want to create. He paused for a moment, letting his words sink in. We're not here to make small changes. We're here to build a new reality. After Elon's speech, the summit proceeded with discussions from a diverse group of speakers. Environmental activists shared stories of communities on the front lines of climate change, scientists presented groundbreaking data on ecosystem restoration, and policy experts discussed the legal frameworks needed to support a global effort. One by one, leaders from around the world took the stage, pledging their support for Tesla Green's mission and outlining their commitment to the future of the planet. Dr. Lang, who had been working on the Southern Africa project, gave a presentation that was met with a standing ovation. She spoke about the success of the solar-powered restoration efforts and how they had not only revitalized ecosystems but also empowered local communities to take charge of their own futures. The work we're doing in Africa is just the beginning, Dr. Lang said, her voice filled with passion. It's proof that with the right tools and collaboration, we can restore entire ecosystems. But we cannot do it alone. We need the support of governments, corporations, and individuals everywhere to make this a global effort. There was a buzz of conversation after her presentation. People were eager to discuss how they could implement similar projects in their own regions, how they could support the cause in meaningful ways. The energy in the room was building. Elon and the other leaders spent the following days in intense discussions, working on strategies to turn their vision into reality. It was clear that the summit was more than just a series of talks, it was the beginning of a new movement, a coalition that would reshape the future. But the challenges were far from over. The summit had only been a first step in a much larger plan. As the days passed, the reality set in, the path to a sustainable future wasn't going to be easy. While many governments had pledged their support, there were still powerful industries that resisted change. Fossil fuel companies, agribusiness giants, and those invested in destructive practices weren't going to give up their profits without a fight. Elon knew this, and it weighed heavily on him. The opposition wasn't just political, it was cultural and economic. It would take more than just a shift in policy, it would take a shift in the way people viewed the world. But Elon also knew that change was possible. He had seen it firsthand with Tesla. People had once doubted electric cars, but now they were a part of the mainstream. The key, Elon believed, was to get people to see the bigger picture, the connection between their actions and the well-being of the planet. If people understood that their choices mattered, that every decision, from the food they ate to the energy they used, had an impact, then the world could change. But how to make this happen on a global scale? The summit had ended, but the hard work was just beginning. Elon knew that the initial wave of enthusiasm, the promises of cooperation, and the declarations of support from global leaders were only the first step. Now, the real challenge lay in turning those words into action. Back at Tesla's headquarters, Elon gathered his core team in a conference room. There was a palpable sense of urgency in the air. The room was filled with experts from all fields, scientists, engineers, policy advisors, and financial strategists. Each one had their task, but the overarching goal was the same, to create a practical, scalable solution that would make the Earth's restoration not just a dream but a reality. We've got a huge momentum right now, Elon began, pacing back and forth. But momentum alone isn't enough. We need to bring real solutions to the table. We need to make sure that every part of this plan, from ecosystem restoration to policy reform, is backed by the right infrastructure. One of the senior engineers, Lucas, spoke up, Elon, we're on track with the solar-powered grid expansion, but we need more aggressive scaling if we're going to reach some of the regions that need it most. The energy infrastructure isn't there yet in many places, especially in the global south. And we need to think about how we can leverage local workforces without contributing to exploitative labor practices. Elon nodded thoughtfully, acknowledging the challenge. He knew that building infrastructure was never just about technology, it was about people, economies, and long-term sustainability. There's also the issue of the industries that are resisting change, said Mia, the policy advisor. It's not just a few holdouts anymore. The oil and gas giants are doubling down. We're starting to see more aggressive lobbying and media campaigns aimed at discrediting Tesla Green's impact. They're sowing doubt about the long-term viability of ecosystem restoration. Elon's expression hardened. He had anticipated the pushback, but that didn't make it any easier to face. He had always been willing to challenge the status quo, but this felt like an uphill battle. They're scared, Elon said quietly, looking out the window. But we can't let that fear define the future. We have to show them that this isn't just an environmental issue, it's an economic one too. Sustainability isn't just about saving the planet, it's about creating a thriving economy that can work in harmony with nature. We need to frame this fight as not just a battle to preserve what we have, but an opportunity to create something new, something better. Mia nodded. That's going to be key when we're talking to investors and corporate partners. We need to position this as an investment in the future. Long-term thinking, not short-term profits. While the strategy meetings were happening behind closed doors, the world was watching. Headlines were flooded with news about the summit, about the ambitious goals Elon had laid out, and about Tesla Green's ongoing restoration efforts. People were excited, but they were also skeptical. After all, promises had been made before, but the world's environmental problems were vast and complex. Could one company, one man, really change the course of history? Elon knew that action spoke louder than words. And while the summit had been a great start, it was just the beginning of the battle. The opposition was not only powerful, it was deeply entrenched. Across the globe, oil and gas companies began ramping up their efforts to stifle Tesla Green's momentum. They launched media campaigns aimed at questioning the feasibility of large-scale ecosystem restoration projects. They painted Tesla's vision as idealistic and impractical, claiming that Elon was more focused on grandiose dreams than on practical solutions. The message was clear: change was too expensive, too disruptive. The global public, however, was beginning to change. People were listening. They were seeing through the smear campaigns, recognizing the value of what Tesla Green was proposing. People began to demand action from their leaders. Environmental movements flourished. Activists began to mobilize at an unprecedented scale. Climate strikes and protests spread across the world. Elon's phone buzzed with messages from supporters, activists, and even some unlikely allies, investors from the tech world who had once been skeptics. They were eager to join the effort, to put their money and influence behind a future they could believe in. Momentum is shifting, Mia said one evening, pacing the room as she scrolled through social media feeds. But we're still in the middle of a storm. There's a lot of noise out there, and we need to keep pushing through it. Elon ran his hand through his hair, clearly exhausted. I know. I've never been afraid of challenges, but this one feels different. It's not just about disrupting the automotive industry anymore. It's about the entire way we think about the planet and how we live on it. It's a fight for the soul of our future. In the midst of these high-stakes political and business struggles, another unexpected challenge arose, one that would test Elon's resolve in a way he hadn't anticipated. One morning, as Elon walked into the office, he was met with a call from Dr. Lang in Africa. Her voice was tight with emotion, and he could hear the stress in her words. Elon, something's happened, Dr. Lang said. There's been a severe drought in one of the key areas we've been working in. It's worse than we thought. Some of the newly reintroduced species are struggling to survive. We might lose critical wildlife. It's happening faster than we can adapt. Elon's heart sank. The success of their restoration efforts in Africa had been one of their greatest victories, and to hear that it was now in jeopardy was a gut punch. But he knew that setbacks were part of the process. What mattered was how they responded. "I'll get the team on it right away," Elon said, determination in his voice. "We've faced worse before. Let's find a way to adapt and get through this. I'm not giving up on this project." The following weeks were a whirlwind of activity as Tesla Green responded to the emergency in Africa. Elon was in constant communication with Dr. Lang and her team, working tirelessly to mobilize resources and expertise. The drought was worsening, and with it, the delicate balance of the ecosystem they had worked so hard to restore began to unravel. Species were at risk, water supplies were dwindling, and the hope that had fueled the project felt like it was slipping through their fingers. But even in the face of adversity, Elon's resolve remained unshaken. He knew that this wasn't just about saving a few animals, it was about proving that the restoration of ecosystems on a global scale was possible. And if they could weather this storm, it would set the stage for the even larger battles to come. "Elon, we've got a serious issue here," Dr. Lang's voice crackled over the phone as she updated him on the latest developments. "The situation is dire. The species we've reintroduced are failing to adapt as quickly as we hoped. But we're not throwing in the towel. We're bringing in more drought-resistant plants and focusing on strategic water conservation methods. We'll need support from all fronts, but it's not over yet." Elon's mind raced, but he remained calm. "What do you need from me?" "I'll mobilize whatever resources we can, just tell me what you need." Dr. Lang hesitated for a moment. "We're going to need emergency funding to expand our efforts, along with access to the most cutting-edge water management technology. We can't afford delays." "I'll make it happen," Elon replied. "You'll have everything you need." As soon as the call ended, Elon turned to his team. They had been preparing for moments like this, but there was no denying the weight of the challenge. Tesla Green wasn't just battling environmental crises, they were up against powerful industries, naysayers, and now, the brutal forces of nature itself. "We've got one shot to make this work," Elon said to the team, his voice intense. "This drought is the test. If we can push through this, we'll prove that what we're doing is possible. We'll show the world that restoration isn't just a nice idea, it's a necessity." The team sprang into action. Engineers and environmental scientists were dispatched to Africa to assist with water purification and sustainable irrigation systems. Business development teams contacted major investors, urging them to back Tesla Green's expansion into water management technology. The response from investors was overwhelmingly supportive. People were starting to see the bigger picture. This wasn't just about a car company. It was about creating a future that worked for everyone. As the efforts in Africa intensified, Elon's mind kept returning to the global picture. The opposition was getting louder, more aggressive. Large corporations and fossil fuel companies, threatened by the success of Tesla Green, ramped up their smear campaigns. A coordinated PR assault questioned the feasibility of large-scale ecosystem restoration and painted Elon's initiatives as risky and impractical. They accused him of overreaching, of wasting resources on a fantasy. But the more the opposition pushed, the more determined Elon became. He knew the risks, but he also knew the rewards. Tesla Green was about more than just fighting for the environment, it was about creating a new model for how humanity could live on this planet. A model based on symbiosis, cooperation, and sustainable growth. A breakthrough came on the 7th day of the emergency response. The team in Africa had successfully implemented a water conservation system that significantly reduced water usage in the area. In addition, new, drought-resistant plant species that had been carefully tested in controlled environments was showing signs of success in the wild. It wasn't a complete solution, but it was progress. Dr. Lang's voice, when she called to report the good news, was filled with relief. "Elon, we've seen a drastic improvement. The new plant species is thriving in the areas where we've introduced them. The water management systems are holding up, and we've even had some of the native herbivores start to recover. We're not out of the woods yet, but this is a major step forward. Elon leaned back in his chair, his heart pounding with a mixture of relief and pride. That's incredible. You've done more than I could have hoped for. We're not done yet, Dr. Lang replied, her voice full of resolve. But this is proof that we can adapt. We can make this work. The Earth is resilient, and with the right tools, so are we. Back in the US, Elon faced the next challenge, public perception. The media was still filled with criticisms from fossil fuel companies, casting doubts on the long-term feasibility of ecosystem restoration. They framed Tesla Green's work as naive, a pipe dream that was destined to fail. The corporate-backed media tried to paint Elon as someone chasing a fantasy at the expense of practical solutions. Elon knew they had to fight back, not just with technology and innovation, but with truth. Tesla Green's success in Africa couldn't be dismissed as a fluke. It had to be framed as a model for the world. The planet was facing unprecedented challenges, and if humanity wanted to survive and thrive, bold action was required. To combat the narrative, Elon and his team prepared a new media campaign, one that would highlight the tangible results they had achieved. They would showcase the growing success of Tesla Green's restoration projects, from Africa to the American Midwest. The stories of the communities being empowered by these initiatives would be front and center. The message was clear: this wasn't just a fight for the environment. It was a fight for the future of humanity. The world was watching. For the first time in history, humanity wasn't just reacting to climate change, they were actively fighting back. Tesla Green's efforts were no longer just a hopeful dream. They had become a beacon of possibility, a shining example of what the future could look like if the right steps were taken. Elon could feel the tide beginning to turn. The attacks from fossil fuel giants had not stopped, but they had lost some of their sting. People were starting to question their messages, and more importantly, they were beginning to demand action from their governments. The media was starting to report not just on the challenges but on the successes, too. The drought in Africa was far from over, but Tesla Green had proven that even in the face of nature's wrath, restoration was possible. It was proof that technology, ingenuity, and resilience could work in harmony to heal the planet. But Elon wasn't naive. He knew that progress, especially when it came to something as vast as environmental restoration, would never be linear. There would be setbacks, new challenges, and unexpected obstacles along the way. The journey was long, and the stakes were higher than they had ever been. Back in the office, Elon was reviewing new data on Tesla Green's restoration efforts. The African project was showing signs of growth, but it wasn't enough. The team had made progress, but the critical next step was scaling the solution to other regions facing similar crises. Droughts, wildfires, and soil degradation were widespread, and each part of the world had its own unique set of challenges. Elon, we've just gotten a new report from the Amazon, Mia, his policy advisor, said as she walked into his office. It's not good. Deforestation has accelerated in the last few months, and the indigenous communities are reporting that the situation is getting worse. If we don't act soon, we'll lose entire ecosystems. Elon nodded, his face grim. He had long been aware of the Amazon's fragile state, but hearing about the accelerated deforestation was another stark reminder of the urgency. We need to get boots on the ground there immediately. Let's get in touch with the local leaders and the NGOs we've partnered with in the region. We can't afford to wait. Mia hesitated, glancing at the stack of reports on Elon's desk. The funding is tight, Elon. We've made a lot of progress, but we need more support to mobilize this quickly. And the political situation in Brazil is complicated. There's a lot of resistance from local industries that profit from the deforestation. Elon leaned forward, his eyes narrowing with determination. We've got to be creative. The people there need our help. And the planet needs us to show that this can be done, even in the most difficult situations. Let's prioritize that region. We'll find the resources, and we'll get to work. Across the globe, the efforts to restore ecosystems were gaining momentum. Tesla Green's innovative approaches were becoming models for other countries to follow. In Southeast Asia, a coalition of governments and businesses had started a similar initiative to address deforestation in the region. In the United States, there were growing efforts to revitalize the Midwest, restoring farmland that had been decimated by industrial farming practices. Communities were beginning to rally behind these efforts, with local leaders pushing for sustainable farming practices, renewable energy, and ecosystem protection. The change wasn't just happening on the ground, it was happening in the hearts and minds of people everywhere. A global awakening was occurring, and for the first time in decades, people were starting to believe that change was possible. As the weeks passed, the Tesla Green movement expanded. New projects were launched, not just to restore land, but to empower local communities. From solar-powered water filtration systems in arid regions to new educational initiatives for sustainable farming practices, the scope of Tesla Green's mission was expanding rapidly. But even as progress was made, the task ahead still felt insurmountable. One evening, Elon found himself alone in his office, staring at a map of the world. Red dots marked areas where Tesla Green was working, regions recovering from natural disasters, ecosystems in danger, and communities striving for a better future. Each red dot represented a battle, but it also represented a victory, a testament to the resilience of the planet and the people fighting to protect it. Elon's phone buzzed. It was a message from Dr. Lang in Africa. "We're seeing a massive improvement in the reintroduced species," she wrote. "The drought-resistant plants are thriving, and we've managed to protect the local water supply. But we need more funding to scale the solution. The progress is promising, but we can't afford to slow down now." Elon's fingers hovered over the keys, his mind racing. The progress in Africa had been a critical success, but without additional resources, the efforts would falter. And he knew that this wasn't just about saving one project, it was about setting a precedent for the entire world. He took a deep breath, making a decision. He would address the world again. This time, it wouldn't just be about the promise of a better future, it would be about the urgent need to act now. The world needed to understand that the stakes were higher than ever. Tesla Green was not just an initiative for the wealthy or the privileged, it was for everyone. The next day, Elon took to social media, releasing a video message that would quickly go viral. The tone was different from his usual corporate updates. It was personal, urgent, and heartfelt. "This isn't just about one company," Elon began, his face serious, but resolute. "This is about the future of our planet. The reality is that if we don't take action, and take it now, the planet will continue to suffer. What we're doing at Tesla Green is only a small part of the solution, but it's a part we can't afford to ignore. The Earth is resilient, but it needs our help. We need to restore the ecosystems that have been ravaged by years of neglect, pollution, and exploitation. We need to make bold, sweeping changes that will protect our planet for future generations." He paused for a moment, letting the gravity of his words sink in. "I'm asking for your help. We've made incredible progress, but we can't do this alone. If we all stand together, we can make the world a better place. A sustainable world, where future generations will have clean air to breathe, fresh water to drink, and forests to roam. We can do this. But it starts with each of us." Elon finished the video with a call to action, urging people to support the initiative, whether through donations, spreading the word, or simply getting involved. Within hours, the video had been shared millions of times. The response was overwhelming. For the first time in a long time, Elon felt a sense of hope. He could see it in the responses, the determination, the willingness to fight for something greater than oneself. The battle was far from over, but for the first time, it felt like they had the support they needed to win. The days following Elon's impassioned video were a blur of activity. His call to action had sparked an unprecedented global response. Communities rallied together, governments took notice, and individuals from all walks of life, some deeply invested in the environment and others simply looking for a way to make a difference, joined Tesla Green's mission. It was clear that people were beginning to recognize the urgency of the situation, and that they were ready to do their part. The movement had crossed a threshold. Elon was no longer just leading a company, he was leading a global movement for the planet's future. On the ground, the restoration efforts were gaining momentum. In Africa, the success of the drought-resistant plants was inspiring more investments from private sectors, while local farmers had begun adopting water-efficient irrigation practices. The Amazon was still under threat, but there was hope now, a tangible sense that if the world worked together, there was still time to turn the tide. But despite all the progress, the stakes had never been higher. The opposition was not going to give up. The fossil fuel industry, now backed into a corner by the rapidly growing green economy, had begun to escalate their efforts to undermine Tesla Green. Disinformation campaigns, corporate lobbyists, and media outlets were working overtime to sow doubt in the public's mind. Elon had expected this. Change always comes with resistance. But as he sat in his office, watching a news segment that criticized his initiative as nothing more than a corporate greenwashing ploy, he knew that they were in for a much bigger battle than anyone had anticipated. Mia entered the office, her face lined with concern. She had just gotten off a call with the board. "Elon, we need to address the attacks on Tesla Green. Fast. The pressure is mounting, and we're not just dealing with public opinion anymore. There's talk of regulations being introduced to make our efforts more difficult." Elon didn't flinch. He had anticipated this. "What's the latest?" "The opposition is pushing for new restrictions on carbon credits, and some legislators are proposing that eco-restoration projects should be limited in scope to prevent overstepping," Mia explained. "They want to regulate who can restore what and where. It's a direct attack on what we're trying to do." Elon ran a hand through his hair, his mind racing. He could feel the weight of this battle more than ever. But he also knew this was part of the course. They were playing the long game, and nothing worth fighting for ever came easy. "We'll fight it," Elon said, determination in his voice. "We need to take this head on. We'll increase our lobbying efforts. And we'll show them the facts. Our projects are working, and they're helping people. Not just animals, but entire communities. We're not just saving the planet, we're saving lives. We'll gather the data, and we'll present it." Mia nodded. "I'll get the team on it. We've got the research to prove it. But the timeline is tight. These discussions could happen faster than we expect." The next few days were a whirlwind. Elon and the team launched a global data-driven campaign to combat the misinformation, sharing real-world success stories from Tesla Green's projects. They gathered testimonials from local leaders in Africa, Southeast Asia, and the Midwest. Farmers, indigenous communities, and everyday people who had witnessed firsthand the benefits of restoration spoke out, urging governments and citizens to support the cause. At the same time, the political pressure was mounting. Legislators in key countries were beginning to discuss the new restrictions on eco-restoration, and there was a growing backlash from the oil and gas industries. The media was once again filled with headlines calling into question whether Tesla Green could truly change the world or if it was simply another tech billionaire's pipe dream. Elon had grown used to being in the line of fire, but it never got easier. In fact, it had become more personal. He wasn't just fighting for the planet anymore, he was fighting for every person who had believed in the movement and for the countless people around the world whose lives depended on these efforts. His mind raced with possible solutions, but the path ahead was uncertain. Could they overcome these new challenges? Could they win in the face of such fierce opposition? Then, just when the pressure seemed unbearable, came the breakthrough. It was a phone call from Dr. Lang in Africa. "Elon, you won't believe this," she said, her voice brimming with excitement. "We've just received a grant from a group of international investors. They've been watching our progress closely, and they want to help fund the expansion of our project. They're not just interested in Africa, they want us to bring this to other regions. They're backing us publicly. This is exactly what we need to keep moving forward. Elon felt a surge of relief. This is huge. But we still need to keep pushing. The opposition isn't backing down, and we need to make sure we're prepared. We'll be ready, Dr. Lang assured him. We've proven the model works. This new backing gives us the momentum we need. It's a game changer. The announcement of the new funding and international support came at the perfect moment. Just as the debates about the new regulations were heating up, Tesla Green released a detailed report showing how their efforts had reduced carbon emissions, improved water quality, and restored biodiversity. The report highlighted not only the scientific success of the restoration projects but also the positive economic impact on local communities. The response was immediate. While the opposition continued to push for restrictions, the growing coalition of supporters, now including international investors, scientists, and local communities, had shifted the narrative. Public support for Tesla Green had reached new heights, and lawmakers who had initially been skeptical began to rethink their stance. For the first time in a long time, Elon felt cautiously optimistic. The tide was turning in their favor, but he knew that this was just the beginning. Tesla Green's success wasn't guaranteed. It was going to take every ounce of determination, innovation, and grit that he and his team had. As Elon looked out the window of his office that evening, he realized that their work had only just begun. The battles ahead would be tough, but they had proven something crucial. They had shown the world that humanity could come together to solve the environmental crisis. And that was the most powerful thing of all. He picked up his phone and sent a quick message to Dr. Lang. "We're in this together. Let's keep going. The world is watching, and we can't let them down." Then, as the city lights twinkled in the distance, he took a deep breath. For the first time in a while, he allowed himself a small smile. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear: Tesla Green was more than just an idea now. It was a movement, and it was unstoppable. The momentum behind Tesla Green was undeniable. In the weeks that followed the release of the international support announcement, something remarkable began to happen. The world started to shift its focus. Governments, once resistant to the disruptive nature of Elon's plans, were beginning to pass legislation that favored renewable energy, ecosystem restoration, and carbon reduction. Elon stood at the center of it all, an unlikely hero in the global struggle for environmental survival. But the task ahead was far from over. He knew that every victory brought a new challenge, and he couldn't afford to slow down. The intensity of the fight was growing, and the stakes were rising with every passing day. One afternoon, Elon sat in a conference room with Mia, Dr. Lang, and several key members of the Tesla Green leadership team. They were preparing for a global summit that would bring together leaders from across the world, politicians, business executives, environmentalists, and activists, to discuss the future of climate action. This summit would be the moment when Tesla Green could either solidify its place as a global leader or risk falling into the noise of political bureaucracy. Mia, who had become a close advisor, turned to Elon, her expression serious. "This summit could change everything. We've secured a lot of global support, but there are still key skeptics. Some of the biggest industries, especially the fossil fuel sector, are pushing back harder than ever. If we can convince the leaders here that we're not just a pipe dream, we can set the tone for the next decade of climate action." Elon nodded. He could feel the weight of the world pressing down on his shoulders. "I'm not just trying to convince them we're right, Mia. I'm trying to convince them that if we don't act now, we'll lose the battle. The world is changing, and if they want to be part of the future, they'll need to embrace it, not fight it." The day of the summit arrived. It was a packed venue, with rows of chairs filled by delegates from every corner of the globe. The eyes of the world were upon them. This was it, the moment of truth. Elon stood backstage, nervously adjusting his tie. He could hear the murmur of the crowd, the quiet buzz of conversations about everything from trade to technological innovations. He had spoken at numerous events, but this one felt different. This wasn't just about making a good speech, it was about saving the planet. Mia walked up to him, giving him a quick smile. "You've got this. Just remember, we're not just speaking for ourselves, we're speaking for all the people whose lives depend on the work we're doing." Elon nodded. "I know. Let's make this count." When Elon finally stepped onto the stage, the room fell silent. The spotlight was on him. The tension in the air was palpable, but Elon didn't flinch. He took a deep breath and began. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice steady and clear, "the future of our planet is no longer a question. It's a choice. We can continue down the path of destruction, or we can embrace the future of sustainability and restoration. The choice is ours." He paused for a moment, letting his words sink in. "We've already seen the success of Tesla Green's projects. In Africa, we've restored arid lands to productivity. In Southeast Asia, communities are now benefiting from sustainable agricultural practices that preserve biodiversity while feeding millions. But the reality is, these are just small pieces of a much bigger puzzle. If we truly want to heal the planet, we need to scale our efforts." The room was still. He could feel the weight of the moment, but he pressed on. "The fossil fuel industries will not go quietly. They have spent decades profiting from the degradation of our planet. But this movement, this global awakening, has already begun. People are standing up, demanding change. And it's not just about the planet, it's about our children, our communities, and our future." He met the gaze of several world leaders in the audience. "We can't wait any longer. We must work together, governments, businesses, and individuals, to scale these solutions. The time for half measures has passed. It's time for bold action. And we cannot afford to fail." Elon finished his speech, the room now filled with a mixture of silence and applause. He knew that this speech was only the beginning, but he also knew it had made a profound impact. The message had been clear: this wasn't just about one person, one company, or one project. This was about the collective future of humanity. The tipping point had arrived. In the days that followed the summit, something extraordinary happened. World leaders began to respond. Countries that had previously been reluctant to support large-scale environmental reforms started passing laws that incentivized restoration efforts and renewable energy investments. Tesla Green's influence was spreading like wildfire. But even as progress was being made, the battles raged on. The fossil fuel industry wasn't giving up. In the face of mounting public pressure, they began to ramp up their disinformation campaigns. They spread misleading studies, funded organizations to protest restoration efforts, and tried to cast doubt on the viability of Elon's initiatives. But this time, the resistance felt different. Tesla Green had built an army of advocates, millions of people who had rallied behind the cause. They weren't just standing by, they were actively pushing for change. The media, too, had shifted. Outlets that had once criticized Elon's vision now reported on the success stories, on the way Tesla Green was transforming communities and ecosystems alike. It was during this time that Elon received a call from a longtime friend, an influential political leader who had once been skeptical of Tesla Green's long-term impact. "Elon," the voice on the other end said, "I need to tell you something. I've seen the data, and I've seen the results. What you're doing, what Tesla Green is doing, it's real. And it's working. You've turned my thinking around. I want to help. How can I support this movement in a way that will really make a difference?" Elon was momentarily stunned. It was a breakthrough moment. The first real sign that the tide had fully turned. "Thank you," Elon replied, his voice thick with emotion. "We can't do it alone. Together, we can make the changes needed to preserve this planet. This is about all of us. And every step forward, no matter how small, matters." As the world continued to mobilize behind Tesla Green's mission, Elon knew that the fight wasn't over. There were still obstacles to overcome, challenges to face, and battles to win. But for the first time in a long time, he felt a true sense of hope. The tipping point had come, and humanity was choosing a better future. Together, they would heal the planet. One step, one initiative, and one victory at a time. It was the eve of the most critical vote in human history. The future of the planet rested in the hands of world leaders who would decide whether or not to commit to the sweeping environmental changes that Tesla Green had helped make possible. The opposition, though weakened, had one final attempt to derail the momentum, an attempt that could push the world back to its old ways. Elon paced back and forth in his private office, staring at the city lights outside the window. The summit, the speeches, the global momentum, it all seemed like it had led to this single moment. He could feel the weight of the situation more than ever. The vote would either cement the future of a restored Earth or doom it to a future where climate change, environmental degradation, and societal collapse would define their existence. Mia stood nearby, her arms folded. Elon, we've done everything we could. The data's been presented, the successes of Tesla Green are undeniable, and the world is watching. The opposition will fight this vote with everything they've got, but we've made it this far. We just need to hold strong. He nodded but couldn't shake the anxiety gnawing at his gut. I know. But it's not just about the vote, Mia. It's about everything that comes after. The changes we've made will be challenged the moment they're passed. We'll need to be prepared for the resistance to turn ugly. The next day, the vote commenced. The entire world watched as leaders from nearly every nation took their turn to cast their vote. The chambers were filled with tension, as each ballot was placed under scrutiny. The opposition, backed by powerful fossil fuel industries, fought with all the tools at their disposal. Misinformation campaigns ran rampant. Lobbyists whispered in the ears of key politicians, trying to sway their decision. It wasn't just a vote, it was a battle for the soul of the planet. But this time, something was different. The citizens, the people on the ground, had made their voices heard. There were protests in the streets, calls to action flooding social media platforms, and petitions from every corner of the globe. The message was simple: this vote would decide if there was a future worth living in. Elon stood in the room with Mia, Dr. Lang, and a few key advisors, awaiting the results. It had been a tense few hours since the voting began. The air was thick with uncertainty. But in his gut, Elon felt something shift. He felt hope. He didn't know how long it would last, but the sense that the world was on the precipice of something remarkable, something unprecedented, was undeniable. A loud beep echoed through the room, signaling the end of the voting. The results were in. The first vote came up on the screen. Passed with 58% approval, the voice of the moderator echoed through the room. The room was momentarily silent, then a wave of applause broke out. Elon stood frozen. The numbers on the screen kept rolling. More approvals. More victories. This is happening, he whispered, his voice cracking with disbelief. His hands trembled as he looked at the results. The fight wasn't over, but for the first time in years, he felt the immense weight of progress. But there was one final, crucial decision left. The vote on whether to officially declare the transition to a global, renewable future. The screen flickered. Yes, the majority vote appeared. A cheer broke out, louder than any Elon had heard before. This wasn't just the victory of a company, it was the victory of a world united. The news broke worldwide. Headlines flashed across screens from every major news outlet. Governments, businesses, environmental organizations, and citizens alike were celebrating the dawn of a new era, an era where the planet's health was finally prioritized above all else. Tesla Green had become more than just a project, it was a movement that had sparked a global transformation. Elon, still in disbelief, found himself sitting at his desk hours later, reflecting on the long road that had led to this moment. He thought about the early days of Tesla Green, the failures, the challenges, and the countless people who had believed in the impossible. He thought about the little bobcat that had first crossed his path, the animal that had unknowingly started it all. That creature had been a symbol of everything he had fought for, the preservation of life, the restoration of what had been lost, and the hope for a brighter future. But as the world celebrated, Elon couldn't help but feel the weight of what was still to come. The fight wasn't over. This vote was only the beginning. The true battle would be in ensuring that this new reality would survive, thrive, and endure for generations to come. Weeks later, Elon found himself standing on a vast stretch of land in a remote region of the world. He was there to oversee the next phase of Tesla Green's projects, now that the world had officially committed to large-scale restoration efforts. As he stood among the towering trees and fresh green growth, he thought about the journey, the struggles, the resistance, and the people who had stood by him every step of the way. It wasn't just about technology, he realized. It was about connection. People had connected with the cause because it was something deeply human. It was about ensuring that life, in all its forms, could thrive. As the sun began to set, casting a golden light over the land, Elon couldn't help but smile. He knew that the road ahead would be filled with challenges. But for the first time in years, he wasn't afraid. Back in his office, he received a message from Dr. Lang. "Elon, I wanted to share something. The bobcat's population in the restoration zone is growing faster than we expected. We've restored not only the land but also the entire ecosystem. The ripple effect is incredible. It's not just wildlife that's returning, but communities too. People are coming back to places they thought were lost forever. And it's all because of what we've built. This is just the beginning." Elon read the message, his heart swelling with emotion. The journey had come full circle. The little bobcat, once a symbol of the fight to protect the planet, had played an unexpected role in the restoration of not only the land but also humanity's connection to the earth. He replied with a simple message. "Thank you. We did it. Together, we did it." And as the world moved forward into this new age of restoration, Elon Musk couldn't help but reflect on the biggest lesson of all: sometimes, the smallest actions, the most unlikely sparks, can ignite the greatest changes. The fight was not just for the Earth, but for the future of all life on it. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?